Imagine having a small DC electrical motor sitting on your laboratory bench powered by a common 12-volt battery. Imagine starting with a fully charged battery and connecting it to the motor with no other power input. Obviously, the motor is going to run off the battery, but by conventional thinking it will stop when the battery runs down. Impossible, you say? Not at all. That's precisely what John Bedini has done, and the motor is running now in his workshop. It isn't running by the conventional wisdom of electrical physics. It isn't running by the conventional rules of electric motors and generators, but it is running. And it isn't something complex. It's pretty simple, once one gets the hang of the basic idea. It's running off the principles of electromagnetics that Nikola Tesla discovered shortly before 1900 in his Colorado Springs experiments. It's running off the fact that empty vacuum, pure emptiness, so to speak, is filled with rivers and oceans of seething energy, just as Nikola Tesla pointed out. It's running off the fact that vacuum space-time itself is nothing but pure massless charge. That is, vacuum has a very high electrostatic scalar potential, it is greatly stressed. To usefully tap the enormous locked-in energy of that stress, all one has to do is crack it sharply and tap the vacuum oscillations that result. The best way to do that is to hit something resonant that is embedded in the vacuum, then tap the resonant stress of the ringing of the vacuum itself. In other words, we can ring something at its resonant frequency, and, if that something is embedded in the vacuum, we can tap off the resonance in vacuum stress, without tapping energy directly from the embedded system we rang into oscillation. So what we really need is something that is deeply embedded in the vacuum, that is, something that can translate vacuum movement to mass movement. Well, all charged particles and ions are already embedded in the vacuum by their charged fluxes, so stressed oscillations, that is, vacuum oscillations, can be converted into normal energy of mass movement by charged particles or ions, if the system of charged particles or ions is made to resonate in phase with our tapping potential. For our purpose, let's use a system of ions. First, we will need a big accumulator to hold a lot of the charged ions in the system that we wish to shock into oscillation. We need something that has a big capacitance and also contains a lot of ions. An ordinary battery filled with electrolyte fits the bill nicely. While it's not commonly known, ordinary lead-acid storage batteries have a resonant ionic frequency, usually in the range of from 1 to 6 MHz. All we have to do is shock oscillate the ions in the electrolyte at their resonant frequency and time our trigger potential and siphon current correctly. Then if we keep adding potential to trigger the system, we can get all that potential to translate into free electrical energy. Look at it this way. Conventionally, electrostatic scalar potential is composed of work or energy per coulomb of charged particle mass. So if we add potential alone, without the mass flow, to a system of oscillating charged particles, we add physical energy in the entire charged particle system. In other words, the potential we add is converted directly into ordinary energy by the embedded ions in the system. And if we are clever, we don't have to furnish any pushing energy to move pure potential around. For proof that this is possible, see Bearden's Toward a New Electromagnetics, Part 4, Vectors and Mechanisms Clarified, Tesla Book Colorado, 19831, Slide 19, page 43, and the accompanying write-up, pages 10 to 11. Also see Aharonov and V. Bohm, Significance of Electromagnetic Potentials in the Quantum Theory, Physical Review, 2nd Series, Volume 115, Number 3, August 1, 1959, pages 485, 491. On page 490 you will find that it's possible to have a field-free region of space, and still have the potential determine the physical properties of the system. Now this free energy resonant coupling can be done in a simple, cheap system. You don't need big cyclotrons and huge laboratories to do it, you can do it with ordinary DC motors, batteries, controllers and trigger circuits. And that's exactly what John Bedini has done. It's real. It works. It's running now on John's laboratory bench in prototype form. But that's not all. John also is a humanitarian. He's as concerned as I am for that little old widow lady at the end of the lane, stretching her meager social security check as far as she can, shivering in the cold winter and not daring to turn up her furnace because she can't afford the frightful utility bills. That's simply got to change, and John Bedini may well be the fellow who changes it. By openly releasing his work in this paper, he is providing enough information for all the tinkerers and independent inventors around the world to have at it. If he can get 1,000 of them to duplicate his device, it simply can't be suppressed as so many others have been. So here it is. John has deliberately written his paper for the tinkerer and experimenter, not for the scientist. You must be careful, for the device is a little tricky to adjust in and synchronize all the resonances. You'll have to fiddle with it, but it will work. Keep at it. Also, we warn you not to play with this unless you know what you are doing. The resonating battery electrolyte produces hydrogen, and if you hit it too hard with a voltage spike you can get an electrical spark inside the battery. If that happens, the battery will explode, so don't mess with it unless you are qualified and use the utmost caution. But it does work. So all you experimenters and pioneers, now's your chance. Have at it. Build it. Tinker with it. Fiddle it into resonant operation. Then let's build this thing in quantity, sell it widely, and get those home utilities down to where we can all afford them, including the shivering little old lady at the end of the lane. And when we do, let's give John Bedini, and inventors like him, the credit and appreciation they so richly deserve. Free energy generation. Introduction. One day a boy who plays with motors and generators gets a brilliant idea. He reasons with himself, if I hook the motor to the generator via the same shaft, the generator should run the motor and vice versa. He soon discovers that many things are against him, so he devises better schemes and finds the same things again. Summary of a Time Life article on energy. However you may view this article, it does not count, because the principles on which our machine works are completely different. At this point, I will make reference to Tom Bearden's Toward a New Electromagnetics, Part 4, Vectors and Mechanisms Clarified, Tesla Book Colorado, 19832. If you plan to build this machine, it is a must that you get Tom Bearden's paper. You will find on pages 20, 21 and 22 the description of a simple free energy motor. Also, you will find a block diagram on page 53, slide 40. Understanding the material in this paper is a must, or you may not succeed in building this simple free energy generator. Special thanks is given to Tom Bearden for discussing a multitude of questions. Without him, this would not have been possible. Any errors made in this paper are my own and not the fault of others. I must also state that neither John Bedini nor the publisher takes any responsibility for misuse of the information in the present paper due to bad hookups, misuse of the battery or faulty mechanical workmanship. Basic concepts. For some time man has been looking for different ways to generate electricity. He has used water power, steam power, nuclear power and solar power. Recent papers written by Tom Bearden make a free energy generator possible. Tom Bearden, rather than patent his devices, chose to share them with people who had open ears. I myself have had numerous conversations with Tom Bearden. I found Tom to be one of the most reasonable men I have ever dealt with in this energy field. Most others would tell you stories of great machines they had, but would never present the truth with circuit diagrams or a look at the machine in question. Tom, on the other hand, clearly presents his ideas and discloses the concepts by means of which they work. The facts I am about to present to you about free energy were never put into textbooks, only portions were. The textbooks have grounded people in conventional theory and made things very complicated. What I am about to explain is very simple. Anyone can understand this theory, and anyone who understands what he is doing can build this device. I have been grounded in conventional theory for some 11 years. I have always tried to study the simplicity of electrical circuits, but my mind wouldn't allow this because of my orthodox training. In any event, I had to change the way I was looking at things. I started to wonder, why do we need to have things so complicated? The truth of the matter is, we have been taught to consume or waste energy at every turn in our lives, so we jump into our cars, turn on lights, etc. In other words, we have been conditioned to waste energy and fuels lavishly, not realizing that someday someone will skyrocket our energy bills to a point where we will not be able to pay for these fuels. Everything will come to a standstill. But laugh as you will, at that time Rube Goldberg machines will power your future. It probably will not be uncommon to see machines from the size of garbage cans to the size of two-story apartment houses powering everything in sight. These machines will be using a force in nature never conceived by the conventionally trained mind of today. The theory I am about to explain to you will bring you one step closer to gaining free energy. To begin my story, I must state that I had a vision, looking for this energy. Many times I hammered my head into the ground, but I refused to give up in my search. Any person with a dream should never let it be wasted by fools, who will always say you can't do that. All that statement really means is that they do not know how to do it. There are many different ways to explain this theory. I will discuss the first one now. The device is very simple and uses electronic circuits. Basically, we drive a direct current motor with pulsed current from a battery, then utilize a special means to cause the battery to recharge itself. First, the battery is connected to a simple flip-flop circuit which in turn drives a simple amplifier circuit. The load, motor, is connected to Q4, 2N5885, figure 3, or between the positive pole of the battery and the collector of the output power transistor. As the motor starts moving forward, the load condition is decreased and the motor draws very little electrical energy. As the energy drawn from the battery is decreased, the flip-flop circuit goes faster and faster to a certain point, which determines the speed of the circuit. However, we can vary the speed by adding certain things that are also simple. The idea is to pulse the motor in a certain time frame, drive a flywheel of some mass, and convert the mass's angular momentum to energy for our use, giving back to the battery all we have robbed from it during one power pulse plus adding a little bit more. An easy way to look at this is to say the battery is 12 volts. To charge this battery we need at least 2 volts over the battery voltage, so we need 14 volts applied in the correct direction. See figure 1. Recharging a battery from a generator. Looking at figure 1 we can see that the generator is at 14 volts and the battery is at 12 volts, so we have a reverse flow condition in the battery, which means the battery is in a charging condition. If, however, the generator did not make 14 volts but say only made 10.5 volts, the generator would act like a motor and just drain the battery away and the current meter would show discharge. So far, this is all just conventional theory on how batteries are charged, and this is all you will find in textbooks, except for some books that tell you how to make special power supplies to charge batteries faster. With the machine I am going to describe to you, we will do better than that. We can actually boil the battery away if the device is not properly constructed. Let's begin by stating certain facts. The ions move backwards under charging conditions and in reverse under discharging conditions. So here we start our new concept. Suppose we have constructed a machine that has tricked this battery into a different space and time relationship. Simply put, suppose the battery never did any work and it should have its full charge left in it. Suppose this becomes possible because we have stressed the terminals in such a way that the ions in the battery electrolyte actually move themselves backwards. The machine, or unit, that makes this possible has many different names. Some people call these units generators, energizers, alternators, etc. Conventionally, such devices have one thing in common: they stress the battery backwards by pushing electricity to the battery and forcibly pushing the ions in the electrolyte backwards. In our theory we are not going to push anything, the ions are going to move themselves, recharging the battery. If we go a little deeper into this theory, you are probably asking yourself, what is this madman talking about? Simply put, we are going to put a stress on the battery terminals for a moment in time and the battery will do the rest. Now comes the heavy part of this theory. What they didn't teach you in textbooks is that, in order for the battery to charge, two oscillatory actions must occur, one at the positive terminal and one at the negative terminal. Under different stress levels, this then forces the ions backwards. The same would occur for an electron. Our machine will slingshot ions in the battery electrolyte backwards beyond the normal recoil action. See Figure 2. Ringing of ions in the battery from a hammer effect. I must give a very stern warning at this time that if the voltage developed is too high, the battery will explode. Use the utmost care. Test setups in my lab have proven that this can be dangerous. Do not build the device and experiment with it unless you know what you are doing, and use the utmost caution. When struck by a sharp voltage spike, the electrolyte in the battery will resonate at a certain frequency, and this can also force the ions backwards. Simply put, the battery, the motor and the energizer will become resonant at some point, ring like a bell when we strike it, and in its ringing the most energy will be developed. The control circuit. For people who like to tinker and like electronics, these are the circuits I have used in my lab to examine this new concept. The circuit contains a very simple, free-running multivibrator circuit which is used to gate the operation of a two-stage amplifier. A motor or other load is connected in series with the collector of the output transistor, and each time the transistor conducts voltage, it will be applied across the load. The input power may be any DC voltage from 6 to 24 volts. The rectangular wave developed at the collector of the second transistor is resistively coupled to the base of the 2N5875, gating it on and off. This stage in turn gates the operation of the 2N5885 used in the output stage. A motor is connected from the positive side of the battery to the collector of the output transistor. The motor pulses at the frequency of the multivibrator. See Figure 3, page 19. Figure 3 circuit for the Bedini free energy device. In Figure 3 it must be remembered that the tuning of the circuit is very important in that the pulsar circuit must be out of phase with the controller circuit. Those persons who have instruments to check this must connect the probes of an oscilloscope on channel A to the collector of the 2N5885 and ground the scope to channel B, which must be across the battery. The waveforms should look like those shown in Figure 4. Oscilloscope waveform. In studying this new concept a little further, we see that something very unconventional is taking place here. The motor is very conventional as far as pulsed waveforms go, but the energizer is doing something very unusual. The waveforms from the energizer are telling us a new story. If we take the scope and expand these waveforms out even further, around 50 MHz, the waveforms look completely different. Ions move backwards. Stimulated resonance provides self-charging. As we look at Figure 5, the story becomes clear. The battery is really charging itself. The ions in the electrolyte are being stressed in a curved space and time relationship. The battery is actually forced into believing that no work ever occurred. The oscillatory action that has taken place by the energizer has just pulsed our slingshot back and immediately let go. Once this has happened, the electrolyte in the battery goes wild and the ions race backwards, giving off hydrogen and oxygen gas. I must make a stern warning here. The time of the stimulating pulse is very important. If the time is too long, the battery will burn itself out. If the pulse time is too short, or if the circuit fails to operate correctly, the battery will never recover its charge. Taking this into consideration, the only failures that could occur would be the controller failing to operate due to a points failure, or the multivibrator latched in the on position. Anyone studying this can see that we have used very little energy to get to this point, and gained a lot of resonant energy in return. We must remember that, if the battery is applied to the energizer longer than normal, we must burn up the excess energy to keep the battery cool. The problem becomes one of embarrassing excess of energy, not a shortage. Now I have one question for you: what will you do with the excess energy and where did you get it? The Energizer. The Energizer is also a simple machine, but if you want to, you can make it very complex. The simple way is to study the alternator principles. The waves we want to generate are like those that come from old DC generators. With the exception of armature drag, bearing drag and no excited fields. Also, we would want to cut the magnetic fields at 90 degrees to the armature. The simpler the better. I am going to throw a few ideas your way. I have run some tests in my lab and discovered that certain types of energizers, generators and alternators do what we need. Also, we want to be able to tune the output of our energizer. The old DC generator puts out something very close to what we need, except for the drag. See Figure 6. Output pulses from direct current generator. Looking at Figure 6, this is pulse DC and everybody will accept this, except me, because the other half has been left out once again. It is the same old story, wasting energy. Conventionally it is not important to know about the other half. Well, it is very important to me, because I need it to build my energizer. The DC generator output actually looks like this when expanded. See Figure 7. Expanded output from a direct current generator. In an AC generator output we are going to see just what we manufactured. See Figure 8. Alternating current generator output. It would appear that this leaves this generator out. Not really, because we can make this generator's output change by rectifying it. See Figure 9. Rectified output from an alternating current generator. In looking at the alternating current generator with rectified output, we see that it could become very useful to us as an energizer, simply because it is the easiest to construct and its principles are simple. I have done experiments with a little different variation of this machine, as shown in Figure 10. According to the conventional books, this alternator principle applies this way, as shown in Figure 11. In Figure 10 most people can see that the alternator drawn here might have some problems. However, remember that I am looking for a certain type of waveform that I want to tune to a certain frequency at a certain speed. The winding of this alternator is a problem and it is tricky, but I chose to stay with this unit. You may choose a different method if you retain the principle. The controller. The controller is a simple piece of equipment to build. However, the controller in Figure 3 could present certain problems if the contacts or points were to arc closed. If this were to happen, the motor soon would drain the energy from the battery and things would die. There is another type of controller I must make known, and it is the simplest of all. With 3 brushes and a commutator, you can do away with all the electronics and handle 100 times the power back to the battery. The simplest method would be a split commutator, of which a little less than 180 degrees would be copper. See Figure 12. Split commutator. This split commutator is going to become our pulsar and our controller, doing away with all the electronics. Just think, no transistors to fail, no relays to stick, no resistors to burn up, and the best of all, no cost. The only thing this unit requires is a little tinkering, and later on you can add the vacuum advance. But enough joking around. The next step is to build a good unit that will last a long time. You may choose to build any other version you wish. Now, we need 312 brushes and you can begin to see how this is going to work for us. See Figure 13. Split commutator with 3 brushes. Physical construction. Equivalent circuit. As we can see, the physical construction, Figure 13a, is nothing more than a simple switch, illustrated in Figure 13b. The thing to remember is that this commutator is completely insulated from the shaft, otherwise the bearings will arc in the motor and the heavy mass, or flywheel, will chew the bearings up. This controller only has one function, to gate the energy from the battery and to return it in the opposite direction. You have already seen the waveforms earlier in this paper. There may be some tinkering around to be done with brush 1 or brush 3, depending on which way you want to hook it up. Also, once again, the timing between brush 1 and brush 3 is very important. Let's look at the way this would be hooked up. See figure 14 on page 28. If you hook up the components as shown and tinker with it until you get a stimulated resonance coupled system, you will have a free running motor that powers itself and performs useful external work as well. I think I have presented the facts as they really are. The machine is simple and not complicated. If built and adjusted correctly, this unit should supply energy for whatever you need. Prototype hookup. Battery. Motor. On motor shaft controller. Mass. Energizer. A photo of a prototype is shown in figure 15 on 31, and on page 32 is a diagram of the device I am now building as the second phase of this development. The devices shown are my original concepts, of which I have actually built several working models. These have been witnessed by reliable observers. Several of these units are being constructed by friends and acquaintances, based on my instructions. For those who wish to build and make improvements in the units described, the very best of luck to you. I am willing to offer suggestions to those who are truly involved and need some assistance. John C. Bedini. Construction notes. For those interested in building and experimenting with a free energy unit, a brief description of the basic components used in the original prototype is as follows: motor, GE permanent magnet, 1100 RPM, 1/12 HP. This motor draws approximate 10 amps on pulses on startup. As the speed of the motor increases, the amperage will decrease to about 1 amp on pulses. Permanent magnet motors are suggested based on good efficiency. Battery, 12 volt, 12 amp hour motorcycle battery. Energizer, a standard office type 2-speed AC fan was used for the housing. The coils were replaced with 6 coils of approximate 200 turns of number 20 wire, all in phase. 6 permanent magnets are bonded to an aluminum disc. The arrangement should be similar to that shown in figure 16A/16B. This arrangement is basically a magneto, but will produce more amperage than ordinarily expected of a magneto. Controller. If the controller as shown in figure 13 is used, it is important that provision be made to rotate the brushes in relationship to each other in order to secure the required timing. The author again wishes to stress the fact that while the circuit and apparatus is not complicated, a great deal of tinkering may be required to obtain efficient operation. Much is yet to be discovered in the construction and operation of such a unit, but the first major step has been made. Bedini's test model number 2. Battery. Motor. Mass. Energizer. Controller to motor. Controller to battery from Energizer. Radiant potential energy charger. In this section, we give the setup of the provisional patent application document, and also show the figures illustrating the background of the invention and the invention itself, plus various selected embodiments. We first present the figures on separate pages, in this section 0, so that all figures are clearly reproduced in the beginning. This includes the figures necessary to explain the background information. It is necessary to understand the background information before the operation of the invention can be understood, since the invention can only be described in terms of a mix of quantum field theory, particle physics, higher group symmetry, electrodynamics, etc. It is not describable simply by electrical engineering. Following those figures are the figures of the invention itself, both in terms of circuit diagrams and various embodiments showing typical applications of the invention. Energy exchange between active environment and system. Exchange need not be in equilibrium. Proven in modern particle physics. Arbitrarily absent in electrical power system engineering. Local active vacuum energy exchange with the system. Energy exchange with local curvature of space-time. System is an inert system. No environmental energy input. All energy input is paid for by the operator. External electrical regex generator. Operator pays for this input. Electrical energy from the power line. Electromagnetic system. Losses and inefficiencies. Useful work output. COP equals coefficient of performance. Operation of the normal electrical power system. May 4th be only 17%, and 83% of all the input energy is wasted by the solar cell array. But the remaining 17% is free. Solar cell array transducer. Operator pays nothing for this input. Electrical energy from solar cell array. Electromagnetic system. Useful work. Electrical energy from the power line, operator pays for this input. Heat pump. Heat energy from the atmosphere, this input is free, operator doesn't pay. Electrical energy from the power line, operator pays for this input. Electrical system. Negative electromagnetic energy from local active vacuum and curved spacetime, this input is free, operator doesn't pay for it. Negative energy in. Negative energy pulses from the environment. Negative energy out. Negative electromagnetic energy converges rather than diverges. Amplification effect in resistance, inductance, and capacitive sections. Mechanism for amplification of negative energy flow in impedance sections for sharp gradients. Typical circuit elements that have impedance, and exhibit amplification of negative energy flow, for sharp gradients. Inductance coupled impedance matching trigger device. Free-running S55 timing circuit. High voltage switching, E-amplification, and battery charging operation. High voltage switching across the battery in floating ground situation. Scheme for battery charging from an environmental high voltage source. 200 feet antenna 30 feet of the earth. External elevated antenna for negative energy charging of batteries. Monopole motor patent 450 turns number 23 wire trafiller wound. Full diagram of the radiant energy charger using an silicon controlled rectifier. Radiant energy powering of the magnetic monopole motor. Using earth cells with the potential switch and a transistor. Because of the novel nature of the invention and its use of a unified field theory of electrodynamics, the active vacuum and local curvatures of space-time participate and interact with the system in a manner which cannot be assumed to be a net zero. Indeed, the major object of the invention is precisely to engineer and alter the active vacuum environment, to engineer and alter the local curvatures of space-time, and 3. Take advantage of the ensuing energy exchange between these active environments and the system, in order to provide a system far from equilibrium in said active environments, with the system freely receiving and utilizing excess energy from them, both in conventional positive energy form and unconventional negative energy form. The operation of the invention is not describable in terms of just conventional electrical engineering and classical electrodynamics alone. Instead, the physics of the active vacuum and its interactions with charged matter are involved, as well as the physics of curved spacetime and its interactions with charged matter. The invention also exploits a unique discovery. Using sharp gradients and sharp pulses, the invention stimulates receipt of negative electromagnetic energy from the vacuum. Further, the only limit on how much negative energy can be stimulated and received in the system is the sharpness and peak intensity of the gradient, plus the frequency of producing the gradient, plus the ability of the circuitry to catch and store the negative energy in capacitors, thereby also converting the energy into positive energy. In stimulating the negative energy inflow into the system from the sharply perturbed vacuum, a novel way of utilizing the Dirac sea is stimulated and employed. Some special characteristics of negative energy are given, as well as some of the special interactions in normal circuitry. We have nominated negative energy as also what astrophysicists call dark energy and sometimes quintessence, and explained why. 1. Every university teaches the Poynting energy flow theory, which only considers a minute fraction of the energy flow generated through space outside the circuit conductors, specifically, the fraction that actually gets diverged into the conductors to potentialize the Drude electron gas. When the huge additional Heaviside component of energy flow in curl form present but non-diverged, and arbitrarily discarded by Lorentz is accounted. Then the M-negative, dark, energy produced in sharp astrophysical gradients is sufficient to cause the widespread anti-gravity that is accelerating the expansion of the universe. It is odd that astrophysicists are looking as deeply into the early universe in the sky as can be seen, intensely searching for dark energy when it can readily be found right on the bench and used in any circuit with slight modifications, by utilizing the novel teachings of the present invention. Accordingly, this section briefly summarizes the necessary additional background required from particle physics, quantum field theory, Dirac theory, quantum mechanics, and higher group symmetry electrodynamics, and includes appropriate literature citations. Since the invention uses field energy in mass, free space, wherein said field in the absence of mass is not a force field, we shall refer to energy in that massless, force-free state as radiant energy. Note that radiant energy is not E field energy or B field energy, because the E and B are force fields, actually, force field point intensities, rigorously defined only in charged mass and not in free space. Radiant energy is the force-free field energy in space, and may consist of either positive or negative energy or a mix of both. In short, the invention deliberately engineers the precursor force-free fields, which are naught but curvatures of space and simultaneously asymmetries in the local virtual particle flux of vacuum prior to their interaction with charged mass, to form force fields E and B in said charged mass. Changes of radiant energy do change the energy density of the local vacuum and of local spacetime, hence, they directly and simultaneously alter the local vacuum dynamics as well as the local spacetime curvature dynamics. Changes of radiant energy in space are force-free and hence work-free, and they are more properly referred to as asymmetrical regauging too, already known to be work-free due to the gauge freedom axiom of quantum field theory, also used in gauge field theory and even to regauge the classical Maxwell-Heaviside electrodynamics for simpler equations easier to solve. In this section we explain these novelties as they are used in the invention, and also include the solution to the long vexing source charge problem. This solution was derived by one of the inventors, Bedini, 36, and has been published in several refereed journals in 2000 and subsequently. The result of the invention is a novel new way to utilize electrical circuits, initiating them to rather freely receive excess negative energy from their active vacuum and curved space-time environments, utilize impedances as amplifiers, transduce the received negative energy into positive energy by quick charging capacitors and batteries with the negative energy, and then utilize this excess positive energy for useful purposes such as powering electrical systems and their loads. The result of the free interchange of energy between the active environment and the circuit or system is to provide, I, the free input of excess negative M energy to the circuit from said active environment, S, and, 2, transduction of the excess M negative energy into normal stored M positive energy, thence dissipating said excess positive energy in loads, allowing COP 1.0 operation analogous to that of a common heat pump. Also, by including the small input positive energy necessary to initiate the negative energy entry as part of the system output load, the invention accomplishes controlled positive feedback and, 2, allows COP equal in the manner of a solar cell array in its external solar radiation environment, wherein according to the invention all positive energy dissipated as system input, output, or losses actually is received from the vacuum in the form of negative M energy. Again we accent that, even in a solar cell, it is unknown but true that the energy from the space-time environment is in field-free precursor form, and only becomes electromagnetic force field energy when said entering precursor energy interacts with charged mass in said solar cell. All sections of a circuit that alter the electron mass current thereby affect and alter the effects of the precursor energy's interaction with the charged mass. In short, one can manipulate all parts of a circuit, other than a theoretically perfect conductor section without impedance whatsoever, so as to manipulate the precursor radiant energy interaction with charged mass, to further form additional M force field energy in the circuit. This is a totally different function and capability than has previously been advanced in any other invention. Positive energy flow encountering an impedance element in a circuit encounters positive impedance, such as the notion of positive resistance or positive resistor, resulting in energy outflow losses. Negative energy flow encountering an impedance element in a circuit encounters negative impedance, such as the notion of negative resistance or negative resistor, resulting in energy inflow gains. The excess negative energy inflowing into the impedance regions of a circuit comes freely from the external environment. This effect is herein called environmental amplification, or EAMP for short. Therein lies one of the greatest discoveries and applications of the invention. We explain further, positive energy flow is innately divergent, or scattering, away from the line of flow and into the external environment, outward and away from the line of propagation. Accordingly, a pure conductor must act as an inverse waveguide to hold the energy in along the line of propagation down the conductor, in order to prevent the divergence and scattering of the energy out of the system and into the external environment as system losses. Any impedance in the circuitry path reduces the conductance and thereby reduces that holding in, and so in fact diverges and scatters some of the flowing positive energy out of the system, thereby generating the system losses. Positive energy flowing through real circuitry, which will have some impedances, a priori has some of the energy diverged or lost from the flow and scattered out into the environment. Hence less positive energy flow is output by the system as useful work, than is input to it from all sources. Negative energy is innately convergent, or inflowing, from the external environment into the propagation path, and the conductor must act to hold back the excess negative energy inflow that is constantly trying to inflow from the external environment. Any impedance in the propagation path through the circuitry will reduce that holding back of the negative energy trying to inflow from the external environment. Negative energy flowing through circuitry with successive impedances has additional negative energy additions that inflow from the external environment at those impedances. Hence more negative energy flow is output by the normal system circuitry than is input to it by the design input point or section, the excess being freely furnished by the EAMP effect. By using the negative energy output to charge a proper accumulator, such as a capacitor or battery, it is changed into positive energy. The positive energy storage can then be dissipated to produce more useful work than the energy input by the operator, the excess energy having been freely received from the active environment. In a positive energy system, the system dissipates energy into the active environment. In a negative energy system, the environment dissipates negative energy into the system. To increase the available flow of positive energy through a real system, one reduces the serial impedance, S, of the system. To increase the available flow of negative energy through a real system, one increases the serial impedance C, S, of the system. The invention exploits this property in a novel manner by deliberately causing negative energy to interact with impedance circuit elements. It thus amplifies flowing radiant energy by creating conditions that stimulate the inflow of excess negative energy from the active external environment. The invention does this by means of asymmetrical regauging. According to the gauge freedom principle of quantum field theory, gauge field theory and even common electrodynamics, asymmetrical regauging never requires work since force is not involved. Thus, the invention achieves energy amplification via asymmetrical regauging, without the expenditure of work. We discuss gauge freedom and the definition of work in greater detail later in section I. So a novel feature of the invention is its special use of all impedance sections, capacitive, inductive, and resistive sections of normal circuitry as negative energy flow amplifying sections or EAMP sections, thereby further increasing the input and interaction of negative energy into the system from the local vacuum environment. In this manner most of the circuitry of the invention functions as a series of negative impedances, each further amplifying the available negative energy flowing in the system and available for charging batteries or capacitors. The charged batteries or capacitors then transform the collected negative energy into positive energy. In addition to the inductive and resistive sections of the system, this novel feature of the invention includes the altering of the local vacuum inside a capacitor or battery being charged by the process, so that a further amplified entry of negative energy into the system occurs from this localized region of the vacuum inside said capacitor or battery. Figures 17 to 25 are provided to illustrate the conceptual material of Section 1, Background Information. Figures 26 to 35 further illustrate the invention in detail. Figure 17 on P37 shows the relationships of the three components of the supersystem. Figure 18 on P38 shows that the standard electrodynamics and electrical engineering model assumes away the active vacuum and active curved spacetime of the supersystem, thereby assuming away the very functions and processes that the present invention initiates and applies. Figure 19 on P38 shows coefficient of performance less than 1 operation of a normal electrical power system. Figure 20 on P39 shows the operation of a solar-powered electrical power system in coefficient of performance equals infinity mode. Figure 21 on P39 shows the Tory servoir representation of the common home heat pump's operation. Figure 22 on P40 shows the diagrammatic operation of the invention in coefficient of performance greater than 1 mode, and Figure 23 on P40 shows the diagrammatic operation of the invention in coefficient of performance equals infinity mode. Figure 24 on P41 shows a mechanism for amplification of negative energy flow in impedance sections, for sharp gradients. Figure 25 on P41 shows typical circuit elements that have impedance and exhibit amplification of negative energy flow, for sharp gradients. On radiant energy, its nature and novel characteristics. Flaws in the electrical power engineering model. Figure 17 shows a supersystem model, which more accurately depicts how nature is organized. Figure 17 also shows the interactions between vacuum, curved spacetime, and physical system that do occur. The supersystem consists of I, the physical system and its dynamics, 2, the active local vacuum and its dynamics, and 3, the active local curvatures of spacetime and their dynamics. Dynamics as used herein generally refers to some pattern of changes over time. The physical system and its dynamics are observable. The other two supersystem components, the active local vacuum and its dynamics and the active local curvatures of spacetime and their dynamics, are not observable. In the supersystem model, cause arises from the two non-observable components. The familiar observable changes in the physical system reflect the effects. Now compare Figure 17 to Figure 18. Figure 18 shows that the standard electrical power engineering, EPE, model assumes a flat local spacetime and an inert vacuum. Flat local spacetime has been falsified by general relativity since 1916. Inert vacuum has been falsified since the 1920s by particle physics. Moreover, EPE assumes no input of negative energy. This can also be a false assumption, since negative energy has been known in physics, but misused or not used at all, since Dirac's theory of the electron in 1928 to 1930. These three erroneous assumptions eliminate from the EPE model any effects of the local standard environment. In short, EPE severely mutilates the supersystem 3 of Figure 17, erroneously assuming no extra energy can be received via regauging. Nevertheless, all changes to the observed physical system and its dynamics actually do result from the ongoing interactions between the physical system, I, and the non-observable supersystem components, 2 and 3. The entropic EPE model thus assumes away the precursors of force, and thus assumes away the possibility of engineering those precursors. Hence it assumes away a whole technology, negentropic engineering. The present invention is perhaps the first invention to deliberately evoke and utilize just such negative entropy engineering, a major technology that has been neglected and bypassed by science since the beginning. The EPE model thus focuses on the system and its observable effects, dynamics, and depends for its applicability on Lorentz symmetrical regauging of the Maxwell-Heaviside equations, as self-enforced by the ubiquitous closed current loop circuit. In short, the EPE model is useful and describes nature with sufficient approximation only when the net negentropic effects of supersystem component interactions are made negligible. Its great disadvantage is that it foists COP/CLOM systems upon the world community, always thirsting for combustion of fuel, consumption of fuel rods, etc. and causing the great disruption and poisoning of the planet with energy byproducts and resultants. Vacuum/empty space is highly energetic. Contrary to usual electrical power engineering, in modern physics empty, mass-free, space, which includes the active vacuum, is a very energetic and dynamic medium. It has to be, since it contains the set of all causes and their dynamics, the causative dynamics, which when interacted with mass will and do generate all observed forces and all observed changes in the physical system. Any change in the vacuum, whether a force field, potential, wave, or energy flow movement, energy flow, thus involves the dynamics of this vacuum medium itself. As Davies expresses it, for what might appear to be empty spaces, therefore, a seething ferment of virtual particles. A vacuum is not inert and featureless, but alive with throbbing energy and vitality. A real particle such as an electron must always be viewed against this background of frenetic activity. When an electron moves through space, it is actually swimming in a sea of ghost particles of all varieties, virtual leptons, quarks, and messengers, entangled in a complex melee. The presence of the electron will distort this irreducible vacuum activity, and the distortion in turn reacts back on the electron. Even at rest, an electron is not at rest, it is being continually assaulted by all manner of other particles from the vacuum. In terms of space-time curvature, Evans expresses it beautifully as follows: in standard Maxwell-Heaviside theory, the electromagnetic field is thought of as propagating in a source-free region in flat space-time where there is no curvature. If, however, there is no curvature, the electromagnetic field vanishes. Empirical evidence refutes the Maxwell-Heaviside theory. In general relativity, if there is mass or charge anywhere in the universe, then the whole of space-time is Kirk's-ed, and all the laws of physics must be written in Kerr/ed space-time, including, of course, the laws of electrodynamics. Seen in this light, the 0.3 electrodynamics of Evans and the homomorphic 2 electrodynamics of Barrett are written correctly in conformally curved spacetime, and are particular cases of Einstein's general relativity as developed by Sachs. Flat spacetime. As assumed in classical U.L. electrodynamics, as the description of the vacuum is valid only when the whole universe is empty. This invention utilizes energy in the radiant, mass-free, force-free form that energy takes in space, in the virtual particle flux of the vacuum and curvature of spacetime, prior to its interaction with mass, prior to observation, to form force. The invention uses both M-positive energy and M-negative energy, with special emphasis on the use of M-negative energy. The invention operates in the non-observable virtual state, causative, energy realm, as well as in the observable state, mass system effects, energy realm. Specifically, the invention operates in and upon the precursors that generate forces in and of charged masses. It operates and functions in that area where net negentropic mutual interactions of the three supersystem components need not be and are not negligible, but to the contrary are eagerly sought and maximized. Modern view of force. Mass is a component of force, by the definition F equal delta P divided by delta T, where P equal mass times velocity. There are no force fields in mass-free space, contrary to the assumptions of classical M that such force fields do exist in empty space. The force field in space notion was a result of the original Maxwellian assumption of the material ether, so that mass was thought to be everywhere present. In that case, the force field in space would be the force field in material ether. The equations assumed this and still do, since they were never changed after the Michelson-Morley experiments destroyed the material ether prior to 1900. Modern particle physics already treats all forces of nature as being generated by the interaction of virtual particle flux upon observable mass and charge, and therefore generated by interaction of a precursor. The force prior to observation is that ongoing 4-space interaction of 4-space precursor and 3-space mass. The virtual particle flux with its dynamics, and its associated curved space-time dynamics, is the causative precursor to force and force field. The activity of the virtual particle flux of the vacuum is a known precursor to generating force itself, in and on the mass with which it interacts. Once the forces are generated, the changes caused by the forces to the observable mass and observable charge are measurable, but not the causative virtual particle flux dynamics, the active precursor causes, themselves. Observed force is an effect of the precursor interactions with mass and charge. Only effects are OBS or /ed. Not primary causes. The precursors themselves can be directly engineered and manipulated, before they have interacted with charged mass, and then interacted to create freely altered forces and force fields E and B, and D and H. This is actually a previously unrecognized principle of nature. Forces may be manipulated and engineered in force-free fashion by directly manipulating their force-free precursors. This manipulation may be considered regauging. It is work-free under the gauge freedom law of physics. In this invention, the precursors are freely engineered, i.e., work-free, by simple regauging and then allowed to interact with masses to produce altered forces that do actual work. Thus, useful work can now be produced with free re-gauging energy, and with little or no energy directly furnished by the operator himself. There is no conservation of work law in nature, instead, there is a conservation of energy law. Work is change of form of energy, it is not change of magnitude of energy. Instead, all the energy necessary to perform the work, i.e., to have its form changed, can be received by the system from the engineered precursors in the local vacuum and/or local curvatures of space-time. The invention is in fact the first concrete and practical step in real M systems along the direction of vacuum engineering, envisioned by Nobelist Lee Six. In that sense, the invention is a pioneering invention. An M circuit or system in fact requires a unified field theory for analysis. Quoting Evans 7, this fundamental result of differential geometry implies that electromagnetic energy can be transmitted from a source to a receiver by scalar curvature R, and that electromagnetic energy is available in non-Euclidean space-time. All fields in nature are fundamentally dependent upon, and originate in, scalar curvature R. The charge obtainable from a given curvature R in a given volume is about 12 orders of magnitude greater than the mass obtainable from the same curvature R for the same volume. The electromagnetic energy from non-Euclidean spacetime is available to the earthbound engineer in usable form, and originates in the curvatures inherent in the rest of the universe. The charge and concomitant electromagnetic energy available from curvature induced by mass is amplified by about 12 orders of magnitude. In the invention, the input energy is largely received in the form of negative energy, so much of the heating, friction, fuel consumption, etc. that accompanies presently utilized mechanisms for energizing working systems, with positive energy, can be eliminated, particularly as the technology of this invention is steadily developed. As shown by Einstein, Wheeler, Evans and many others, modern general relativity treats the forces of nature as being generated by local curvatures of space-time interacting with observable mass and charge. Energy identically is curvature of space-time. Further, change of magnitude of energy and therefore change of curvature, i.e., regauging, is work-free since change of space-time curvature is simply regauging. Curvature of space-time is taken as the precursor that interacts with mass to generate force in and of mass systems. The changes to the observable mass and observable charge are measurable, but the causative curvatures of space-time themselves are not measurable. Only effects are observed, not causes. Again, the curved space-time precursors are directly engineered and manipulated by the present invention, before they have interacted with charged mass to create forces and force fields E and B, and H. Hence the energizing or potentializing process for working systems has been fundamentally altered to mostly employ a direct application of gauge freedom. Precursors and their dynamics directly engineered by the invention rigorously are what energy identically is. As we discuss later, this is actually the first formal and testable definition of energy itself, and the invention therefore is a new method for directly engineering causative energy itself, since in any local curvature induced by local mass there is some 12 orders of spatial energy greater than the energy locked in the mass itself 7, then in a local system or device there is no shortage of the available space-time curvature energy available to be precursor engineered. Herein we refer to this precursor or enormous basic M energy of curved space-time as radiant energy. A given exact pattern and dynamics of radiant energy will also be referred to as a causative engine, or just as an engine, where it is understood that a non-material asymmetric gauge freedom engine is being utilized. For any physical system and its forces and functions any whatsoever, there is an exact and specific engine interacting with the masses of that system, at every level, to generate the forces at every level that drive the dynamics of said physical system at all levels. The invention is believed to be the first to deliberately engineer and manipulate the precursor engine itself, in this case the engine of an electrical power system, so that the power system becomes a COP greater than 1.0 power system without the operator himself having to pay to furnish the excess energy. Instead, the environment, space-time and virtual particle flux of the vacuum, is freely engineered or specifically regauged to freely furnish the extra potential energy to the working power system via a form of free re-gauging. It follows that, by deliberately manipulating the precursors, the virtual particle flux itself, which also simultaneously manipulates the local curvature of space-time itself, then the future force, S, subsequently developed on a mass or charge by the interaction of that manipulated virtual particle fluxes, are also being engineered in advance and for free. The causes are being directly manipulated and engineered, not the effects. Directly, freely, changing the precursor causes also changes their subsequent interactions on the physical system to produce observed, real, physical effects such as the forces driving the system. A system exhibiting forces is actually existing in a non-inertial frame, thus in a precursor engine of curvatures of space-time and altered virtual particle fluxes of the vacuum. Hence the most direct form of engineering is to directly and asymmetrically engineer the precursors themselves. The reason is that such engineering is force-free a priori, and therefore requires no FDL work, or, in the real world, requires only a little work for switching and control. One merely alters patterns of potential energy, which is a set of specific asymmetrical re-gaugings and therefore free under the well-known gauge freedom axiom of physics. The invention expands and makes concrete the very notion of re-gauging and gauge freedom. The invention also significantly expands the very concepts of power system engineering and electrical power production. Engineering the effects versus engineering the causes. The conventional engineering method is to assume use of given observable effect forces to further manipulate observable mass and charge and their concomitant fields. The invention, however, manipulates the non-observable causative, precursor, agents themselves, virtual particle flux and curvature of local spacetime, in a pre-engineering operation, thereby freely altering the forces that the altered causative agents will produce in their subsequent interactions with the mass system. It appears that no such direct manipulation of the pre-force or force field-free precursor agents in space, i.e., space-time itself and the virtual particle flux of vacuum itself, has been previously utilized in electrical engineering, battery charging, or powering electrical systems, or for that matter, in any other field of engineering. Contrary to an elementary physics book, mass is a component of force, and this has long been known to leading physicists, such as Feynman, Wheeler, etc. There is no force without the interaction of a non-mass causative agent, curvature of spacetime, or virtual particle flux of the vacuum, and a mass. In short, force consists of I, the causative agent, 2, the observable mass or charge, and 3, the ongoing interaction of the two. Thus force identically is, and reveals, the presence of an ongoing force-free fundamental regauging process acting on a mass or charge. It has no existence at all without the presence and interaction of all three items, I, the active force-free precursor, 2, mass and / or charge, and 3. Their ongoing interaction. This allows an answer to the problem posed by Feynman as to the unfathomable nature of force, when he stated 8. One of the most important characteristics of force is that it has a material origin, and this is not just a definition. If you insist upon a precise definition of force, you will never get it. Feynman's dismay is because the conventional mechanics notion of a separate massless force acting upon a mass is totally false. There is no such thing as a massless force, because the phrase itself is an oxymoron. However, now force does have a precise definition, once the supersystem dynamics are considered and not just the system dynamics. Force may be precisely defined as the presence of an engine interacting with a mass, including charged mass, to produce changes to said mass or charged mass, including all the masses and / or charges of a system. As an ongoing process, the production of force process is subject to direct, work-free pre-engineering of its non-mass causative precursor component. Changing the non-observable causative component does not necessarily require work, because no observable load is being affected or powered. Also, no force yet even exists, so precursor engineering does not involve work W from translating the ongoing force process F through distance S, via the equation W equal FFds. Thus, the accepted principles of gauging and gauge freedom are applied and extended to allow a powerful and novel pre-engineering capability using deliberate combinations of asymmetrical regauging. The work-free energy is indeed changed freely, but conservation of energy is rigorously obeyed because the excess energy is freely received from the active environment. 9, 10. In the modern physics view, the hoary mechanics notion that a separate massless force field in space acts independently upon a separate mass is false, since the term massless force field is an oxymoron a priori. As is well known in Foundation's work, no force field exists as such in empty space, from first principles. As Feynman states 11. In dealing with force, the tacit assumption is always made that the force is equal to zero unless some physical body is present. One of the most important characteristics of force is that it has a material origin. Jackson 12 in fact is aware of this fact in classical electrodynamics, and states how it is ignored by electrodynamicists. Quoting, most classical electrodynamicists continue to adhere to the notion that the electromagnetic force field exists as such in the vacuum, but do admit that physically measurable quantities such as force somehow involve the product of charge and field. Although most electrodynamicists ignore it, for some decades Foundation's physicists such as Feynman have been aware that the field in space and the potential in space are force-free a priori. Hence changing them is or can be work-free also, being mere asymmetrical regauging. The standard gauge freedom principle of physics guarantees this work-free engineering capability to affect and change at will the precursor to force, hence changing the precursor to the production of work as force translated through a distance. Note that force-free engineering of the precursors, the active vacuum and curvatures of space-time, is nicentropy. That is, no work is done, and an additional ordering of some volumetric energy is achieved. This regauging, changing the magnitude of the local energy, though not its form, by disequilibrium energy flow is work-free and permissibly violates the present statement of the second law which requires equilibrium. Also, the regauging requires a slight correction to the present first law of thermodynamics, which has heretofore been incorrectly stated. Work rigorously is the change of form of energy, not the change of magnitude of energy as is assumed by the first law for change of an external parameter of a system such as its potential, and potential energy. The first law thus requires this slight correction, since as presently written it specifically prohibits regauging. As an example, doubling the voltage on a system where no extra current is allowed, freely doubles the collected potential energy in the system. This increase in the magnitude of an external parameter, the voltage, is work-free and is mere regauging, so long as the energy is input in the same form as is the external parameter. In the example, no extra power is required because no extra current is allowed, hence no extra work is required. The additional implications for thermodynamics are intense. This work-free engineering of the precursor to force and work is the long missing half of the present second law of thermodynamics. It allows negative entropy production and engineering as force-free and work-free engineering of the precursors to the forces and force fields in affected matter. We have previously shown the source charge's total violation of the second law of thermodynamics, and we include a necessary restatement of the second law in this paper. The overly restrictive classical second law is already under intense attack and falsification theoretically and experimentally by leading thermodynamicists anyway. 16, 37, 40. That work is briefly summarized and referenced in this section. Further, thermodynamics is recognized to have a fundamental time asymmetry problem. 38, due to the overly restricted second law which presently permits only positive entropy as greater than zero for a given system as time passes. That is falsified by every charge in the universe, which continuously produces negative entropy as zero in accordance with the proof by Evans and Rondoni. 16 that in theory such systems are possible. Hence, one of the novel things involved in the invention is the permissible violation of the equilibrium second law of thermodynamics in somewhat ordinary-looking electrical power system circuits, using novel far-from equilibrium operations that engineer the precursor energy prior to the appearance in and on n of mass of the resulting forces themselves. What has been achieved is this: force, so long regarded as primary in engineering, is not primary after all. Instead, asymmetrical regauging and engines are primary, since engineering them is work-free, yet such engineering freely alters the subsequent forces that are produced in the system and that perform dynamics and work. Difference between field and field intensity. Feynman also stated it even more clearly. 13, we may think of E, x, y, z, t, and B, x, y, z, t, as giving the forces that would he experienced at the time t by a charge located at x, y, z, with the condition that placing the charge there did not disturb the positions or motion of all the other charges responsible for the fields. However, as previously stated, neither E nor B in space is a force field, contrary to the assumptions of the EPE model. In fact, neither E nor B is the volumetric field in space or in mass. Instead, in electrodynamics E and B in space are actually the point intensities of the associated volumetric fields, as determined by reaction cross-section of a unit point static charge, once charge and mass are physically present. Simply check the standard textbook definition of the fields. When a unit point static charge is placed at a point in the field, what gets scattered from the field is assumed to determine the intensity of the field at that point. Similarly for the potentials 0 and A, the 0 and A actually used in the models are not the potentials, but only an indication of their respective point intensities as determined by a unit point static charge. For magnetic fields, of course, a unit point north pole is in fact a unit point magnetic charge. Definition of force. As can be seen from Feynman's cogent statement, if the charged mass being operated upon in a force is removed, there is no force remaining, even though the mass-free fields, and their intensity, are still present. The field as it exists in space has no observable mass, and hence no observable force. The fact that mass is a component of force can further be seen from the definition of force F as can be seen, both terms of the rightmost expansion include a mass term. Hence mass is a component of the non-relativistic part of force F and the rate of change of mass is a component of the relativistic part of force F. We repeat that electrodynamicists and electrical engineers do not actually calculate the phi field or the B field as such anyway, but only the point intensities of their constituent energy flows. 14, as determined by an interacting unit point static charge assumed to be at every point in space occupied by the field or potential. The point intensity of the electromagnetic energy flows comprising a single field or a single potential is most certainly not the field or the potential itself, nor is it the magnitude of the potential or the field. However, most professors and electrical engineers simply use the common corrupted jargon and speak erroneously of calculating the field, and the magnitude of the field, without accurately pointing out that only the magnitude of the point intensity of the field in a precisely limited type of interaction with charged mass is being calculated, not the magnitude of the field itself. Both the field and potential are in fact sets of energy flows, longitudinal electromagnetic waves, as shown by Whittaker 14 in 1903 and 1904. As a trivial example, from any fixed static non-zero field E, any amount of force F can be generated or collected on charges Q, by the simple equation F equal EQ. All one needs is sufficient collecting charges Q, to obtain any amount of force F desired from a given E. Similarly, from a given non-zero potential difference V, any amount of energy will be collected upon charges Q, by the simple equation W equal VQ. The real reason such equations exist and are proper is that the isolated charge in classical electrodynamics is not isolated at all, but in particle physics and quantum field theory involves two infinite charges, two infinite energies, and their exchange. So from two associated infinite energy sources, obviously one can draw as much finite energy as one desires. Aspects of the present invention which take radiant energy, in negative energy form, directly from the earth itself, from a tree, etc., show that copious energy can be collected and received from very small potential differences. These aspects will demonstrate that such energy collection can be done by varying the example parameters, receiving the energy in negative energy form, freely amplifying the negative energy in system impedances, and transducing the negative energy to normal positive energy. Radiant energy engineers the cause rather than the effect. Again, we shall speak of field or potential energy in its mass-free, force-free, spatial form, prior to observation, as radiant energy. In that sense, radiant energy engineering has to do with engineering the dynamics of the curvatures of space-time itself, general relativistic view, or with engineering the dynamics of the virtual particle flux of vacuum itself, particle physics and quantum field theory view. Both precursors are engineered simultaneously by the invention, since a change in one changes the other also. The freely RC engineered precursors then interact with charged mass to generate real forces, which can be very powerful and dynamic, yet initiated by very minuscule control and switching energy during the precursor engineering phase. The reason why a minuscule quantity of control and switching energy furnished by the operator is able to obtain large forces able to do great amounts of work is that the invention's special circuitry uses the minuscule quantity of energy to create the conditions enabling the collection of larger quantities of energy from the environment. Even that minuscule quantity of initiating energy can then be taken from the system's positive energy output, by use of clamped and governed positive feedback. In that case, the system is said to be self-powering. Actually it is powered completely by energy freely received from the external active environment. By dealing with the radiant energy of the causative field or potential existing in space, and in the virtual particle flux of the vacuum, prior to observation, prior to interaction with mass, the invention works directly with and on the massless forceless field itself, before real force has been produced in a subsequent interaction of the field's intensity with mass. The invention thus interacts with and processes the non-observable causative massless field and the causative massless potential themselves. The invention is thus a causative engine as defined previously herein. Nevertheless, when one changes the force-free field without work, one has changed the subsequent work that the field will generate when it later interacts with the charged mass of the physical system. Again, energy is conserved, but work alone need not be conserved. There is no conservation of work law in Nature 15, instead, only the energy need be conserved. The entire radiant energy approach is to get the environment to freely furnish the necessary energy or most of it in advance, thereby changing the energy of the fields and thus changing the fields themselves, prior to their interaction with mass to produce work in the system. In short, this is the mechanism for producing a special kind of non-equilibrium steady state, NES, supersystem one in which the active vacuum environment, and local curvatures of space-time, furnish all or most of the excess field energy and potential energy that appears in the system. Thermodynamically, a NES system is theoretically permitted to exhibit continuous negative entropy in the physical system itself 16, while rigorously obeying the conservation of energy law. The excess ordered energy is furnished by the pre-force active vacuum flux environment. This radiant energy process is also the major mechanism for directly engineering the active environment, active vacuum and curvatures of local spacetime, self-carrying out Nobelist Lee's insight 17 that someday a future technology might somehow enable direct engineering of the vacuum. Further, force is an observable, because it includes change in the state of observable m. 18. Force is an effect of a more fundamental ongoing process interaction of the vacuum and curved spacetime with mass and charge. Force does not exist as such in empty space prior to the observation in accord with Nobelist Feynman's succinct explanation 13. Radiant energy engineering is a method for freely changing the preforce causative agent. The agent then interacts with charged mass to produce changed electromagnetic forces. It is appropriate to recognize that there has previously been no adequate definition of energy. As Feynman bluntly states 19, it is important to realize that in physics today, we have no knowledge of what energy is. From the viewpoint of radiant energy, local energy is any change in the local virtual particle flux of the vacuum, or any change in the curvature of local spacetime. It therefore is any change in the precursor to force, whether or not the precursor interacts with mass and charge to produce force and work. Immediately one notes that this first formal definition of energy includes both positive energy and negative energy. A space-time curvature may be either positive or negative, and the flux of vacuum may increase or decrease in intensity. The field and the potential are volumetric, regional, changes in the local virtual particle flux of the vacuum, as well as regional changes in the curvature of local spacetime. Again, neither E nor B are actually fields, instead, they are point intensities of the fields, based on a static reaction cross-section assumption. An example of radiant energy engineering is the universally accepted asymmetrical Riga-Eugene, where the potential, and thus the potential electromagnetic energy, of a system is freely changed, in accord with the gauge freedom principle of quantum field theory used by all electrodynamicists. Gauge freedom, including asymmetrical freedom as well as symmetrical freedom, 20 is equivalent to the statement that no work is done when only the voltage, potential, and thus potential energy, of a circuit is changed without concomitant current flow occurring in the circuit. Voltage is not work, and change of voltage alone also is not work and does not require work. As Davies states 21, the gauge transformations in electrodynamics correspond to changes in voltage from place to place. As previously stated, regauging is work-free. By regauging, one does not have to furnish all the energy itself to the system oneself. Instead, the active environment is happy to furnish all the energy one requires, if one asks politely and properly. We also recognize that electromagnetic field energy and electromagnetic potential energy in nature exist as ongoing flow processes, as shown by Whittaker in two papers in 1903 and 1904-14. That is, any electromagnetic field and any electromagnetic potential can be decomposed in Whittaker fashion into internal sets of bidirectional longitudinal electromagnetic wave pairs and differential functions of these sets. The volumetric field and potential themselves are actually comprised of hidden electromagnetic energy flows, hence identically are sets of such hidden flows. Again, this explains one of the simplest but puzzling thermodynamic facts in electromagnetic theory. By changing the amount of charge Q available, any desired amount of electromagnetic potential energy will be collected from a given, fixed electromagnetic potential, say, of intensity, P, from a single fixed source, on charges Q, by the simple equation W, J, Q. If the collecting charges are static, no work is done in collecting as much energy as one wishes, from any finite static potential. Even from a small and fixed non-zero electrostatic scalar potential, one can collect as much energy as one wishes, given that one has enough collecting charges. The mere collection of the potential energy is asymmetrical regauging. It involves energy transfer only, and it is work-free thermodynamically. Similarly, given an unlimited availability of Q, any desired amount of electromagnetic electromotive force F can be collected from a given, fixed electromagnetic force free field, say, of intensity E, on charges Q, by the equation F equal EQ. Now either one accepts those experimentally verified and well-known simple electromagnetic equations, or one practices dogma rather than science. The equations tell us very clearly that from a single 12-volt battery one can obtain and collect all the potential energy and potential energy flow one wishes, and the energy can freely be transferred into a receiving charge system such as a special receiving circuit. Mere collection of a huge amount of energy from the continuous energy flow represented by the potential does not involve work. It has nothing at all to do with the ampere hours of the battery, etc. It simply has to do with having enough receiving charge that interacts with that 12-volt potential flowing onto the receiving circuit and potentializing the charges. Of course, one must strangle the current. The flow of current is directly part of power, which is the rate of performing work, which is the rate at which collected energy is being dissipated by the circuit. Current I has nothing to do with the collection of electromagnetic energy into the circuit. It has to do with the dissipation of collected energy from that circuit. Obviously, something that is done in ordinary circuits ubiquitously negates this innate unlimited energy collection ability permitted by nature. That something is the use of the closed current loop circuit. Closing the loop is symmetric re-gauging. Symmetric re-gauging is what continually destroys the dipolar source of the potential energy. The radiant energy engineering principle is that the primary dipolar physical source of potential energy flow should not be connected into the common ground of the receiving and load circuit when appreciable current is flowing in the powering mode. Instead, the potential energy should be transferred from the source to the receiving circuit separately, in energy transfer, asymmetric re-gauging, mode only. Then the external dipolar source should be physically disconnected, at least from the common system ground, and the receiving circuit simultaneously revised to connect the load, free the now potentialized electrons, and allow the current to flow. In that way, free potential energy collected by the statically receiving circuit via gauge freedom is then dissipated by the separated dynamic circuit to power the loads and losses. None of the collected energy is dissipated to destroy the primary source dipolarity. Further, ideally the input energy should be in negative energy form, so that every element of the circuit having impedance acts as an amplifying negative impedance or EAMP to cause much more negative energy influx from the local active environment. Then the negative energy should be transduced by the receiving circuitry so that normal powering of loads can then be accomplished, with a little switching. Combining, there are two parts to the radiant energy engineering principle, a static part and a dynamic part. The static principle is: potentialize statically, depotentialize, dissipate, dynamically. By potentializing statically onto a substantial quantity of charge, even a small voltage can produce large amounts of collected electromagnetic energy in the receiving circuit. Then by freeing the charges to flow as current, power appears. Potentialized current is driven through the load, dissipating that potential energy dynamically in the load, but with the original small voltage source disconnected. The dynamic principle is: potentialized dynamically by very sharp pulses so that negative energy inflow is copiously and freely produced. Direct this augmented negative energy pulse to a capacitive collector through a momentarily isolated circuit containing impedances, where the impedances act as negative energy amplifiers with excess energy furnished by the immediate altered vacuum and curried space-time. The isolation of the dynamic sharp gradient is achieved via manipulating the grounding, usually by floating the ground. We will further discuss the dynamic principle shortly. By use of the radiant energy engineering principles, very large loads can be powered in iterative dynamic powering cycles interspersed by intermediate work-free collection of large amounts of re-gauging energy, freely furnished by the active environment as excess negative energy inflow from the environment, in a static collecting cycle. For continuous operation, one stores the re-gauging energy in multiple collectors, and iteratively switches the collectors to serve as the actual power source of the dynamic dissipation cycle. By the static principle, energy collection is accomplished in static, pure energy transfer regauging mode. Load powering is performed in a normal dynamic current mode by discharging from a collector the energy previously collected in static mode and transduced to positive energy. In this manner, energy from the completely free negative energy flow, extracted from the local vacuum, and triggered by any dipolar source can be utilized without destroying the source's dipolarity and its continuous flow of energy from the local vacuum. Radiant energy can consist of positive or negative energy or both. In nonlinear situations such as pulsing and sharp gradients, the Dirac sea must be specially considered since it is essentially the nascent vacuum prior to alteration, and it is appreciably altered by strong gradients. Sharply changing the local energy density, and space-time curvature, of the local vacuum can and will lift Dirac particles, particularly normal positive energy electrons, from the sea, leaving behind the temporary presence and temporary persistence of unfilled Dirac sea holes, negative energy electrons, in Dirac's theory. During the sharp gradient of the pulse, the Dirac sea vacuum is made asymmetrical and dipolar, by separating holes from their normal occupying electrons. The asymmetrical vacuum becomes a source of excess negative energy electromagnetic fields and potentials. As negative energy source charges, the temporarily persisting holes pour out negative electromagnetic energy transduced from their vacuum interaction, thereby forming negative energy electromagnetic fields and potentials spreading in space at light speed. Since these negative energy force-free fields can and do also exist in space and can and do interact with elements of the physical electromagnetic system and circuitry, then the term radiant energy may include both positive energy and negative energy, including negative energy electromagnetic fields and negative energy electromagnetic potentials. Radiant energy interaction and effects upon the physical system are thus far more complex than are specified in the EPE model. Additional physical phenomenology absent from the EPE model is present in radiant energy interactions. One strikingly unusual phenomenon commonly encountered in radiant energy engineering is the natural amplifying effect of impedances in the circuit, when negative energy from the environment impinges upon the impedances. One purpose of the invention is to take advantage of novel characteristics of radiant energy 22 and its interactions for the direct extraction of M energy from the vacuum, by an initial or original source, in energy flow form, and to utilize work-free energy transfer to collect usable electromagnetic energy in circuits via work-free asymmetrical regauging. Once the energy has been freely collected in the system from a given energy flow source, then that original source of potential may be disconnected, and the freely regauged, collected, excess potential energy of the circuit can be separately discharged into a load to power it. In this way, no back EMF effect is generated upon the original source of static potential during the powering cycle, because then the original source is not even connected to the common system ground. In short, the original source of potential can be used and reused to furnish potential, without degradation. This allows all back EMF in the discharging, powering, circuit to be completely isolated from the original source of potential energy flow. Hence, no back EMF work is done in the system by forcing current back through the original dipolar source of energy flow to destroy its dipolarity, thereby shutting off the free energy flow. The invention further takes advantage of the proven asymmetry of opposite charges, therefore of any dipolarity, 33, which will continuously extract and output usable electromagnetic energy directly from the vacuum itself, 23. The asymmetry of opposite charges has been proven in particle physics since 1957. But it still does not appear in the EPE model since that model does not even include the active vacuum. EPE also excludes the usage of negative energy charges, negative energy fields, and negative energy potentials. The result is that the invention uses methods and processes that convert an electromagnetic system or device into a non-equilibrium steady state, NES, system, for either positive or negative energy or both, with accent on the negative energy. The system freely receives excess radiant energy from the altered active vacuum in virtual state form, coherently integrates that energy into real observable, and usable, field energy and potential energy, and then separately collects and discharges this excess observable electromagnetic energy in loads to obtain a coefficient of performance, COP, of COP greater than 1.0. A device using this process can permissibly exhibit far more work output than the input energy component furnished by the operator himself, since now the local vacuum environment furnishes the additional energy input component required. By adding clamped and governed positive feedback from the positive energy system output to the operator's positive energy input section, a device using the process of the invention can also exhibit COP equals infinity, i.e., so-called self-powering, which is powering by the environmental vacuum's energy input, analogous to how a solar cell is powered by its active solar radiation environment. Again, this active vacuum powering does not appear in the EPE model or in present electrical power system engineering practice. Efficiency versus coefficient of performance, COP. The overall efficiency of the system is always less than 100%, and conservation of energy is rigorously obeyed. The new process, however, is analogous to that of a common home heat pump, which may have an efficiency of 50% so that half of all the total energy input to the heat pump is wasted. However, since in addition to the operator's energy input there is an additional input of excess energy from the environment, the common heat pump in nominal conditions has a coefficient of performance equal 3.0 to 4.0, even with only a 50% efficiency. Figure 21 on P39 shows the nominal heat pump operation. The process utilized by the invention, Figure 22 on P40, operates in a fashion analogous to the home heat pump 24 except that it uses excess energy, particularly negative energy, freely received from the local vacuum environment. Analogous to the common heat pump, in coefficient of performance greater than 1 operation the invention's process thus has two energy reservoirs, not just one. The two energy reservoirs from which input energy is received are, I, the small amount of energy input by the operator himself and paid for by him, and, 2, the free excess energy input by the local vacuum environment. Although it remains a process where efficiency less than 100%, this two-reservoir energy input process where one reservoir contains extra energy freely made available from the environment permits the system in Figure 22 by the laws of physics and thermodynamics to exhibit coefficient of performance greater than 1, analogous to the heat pump, and even coefficient of performance equals, analogous to a solar cell in an environment of solar radiation as shown in Figure 20-25. In coefficient of performance equals infinity case, all the necessary input energy used by the system is furnished freely from the local vacuum environment. In that case, once the process is initiated and ongoing stably, the operator need furnish no additional energy at all, for the process to continue and perform useful work continuously in the manner of a windmill or solar cell array. Thus in Figure 23 on P40 the invention's coefficient of performance equals, self-powering, operation is analogous to the operation of a windmill in a free wind, or a solar cell array in a solar radiation environment. Even with coefficient of performance equal the efficiency is always less than 100%. For example, a very efficient windmill with coefficient of performance may have efficiency equal 50% and waste half of all the energy input to it, and a solar cell with coefficient of performance equal may have E equals 17% and waste 83% of all the solar energy input to it. Coefficient of performance is defined as the energy or useful work output, divided by the operator's energy input only. If the operator inputs nothing while the environment does input all the energy, and if the machine produces any useful output at all, then the coefficient of performance equals infinity, regardless of the fact that it is less than 100% efficient. Conservation of energy is rigorously obeyed by both coefficient of performance less than systems and coefficient of performance equals infinity systems, as shown by less than 100% for coefficient of performance less than 1 operation, for coefficient of performance greater than 1 operation, and for coefficient of performance equals infinity operation. All energy that is output by the system as useful work and system losses is in fact rigorously input to the system and to the process, by the active environment. The present invention has merely applied unconventional ways to receive the excess energy from the active virtual state energy vacuum environment itself, rather than from more conventional environments such as the windy atmosphere, temperature of the local air in the environment, or solar radiation. Some novel characteristics and actions of negative energy. Some novel characteristics of negative energy flow must be noted, particularly for impedance sections of the circuit that are independently grounded in floating ground fashion, and not tied to common bus ground in the closed current loop circuit. As previously explained, normal flow of M positive energy, diverging energy, directed down a resistive or impedance wire results in scattering some of the positive energy flow out into the surrounding environment, so that some of the transferring energy flow is lost, scattered, to the environment en route to the load. This wastes that scattered energy as heat, in any system where the purpose is to pass the energy on down the wire for use elsewhere in the system. Positive energy is said to be heating energy. On the other hand, flow of electromagnetic negative energy, converging energy, through an impedance, such as a resistive wire, results in an exactly opposite and startling function. Reference is made to figure 24 on P41. Illustrating environmental amplification achieved by passing negative energy through an impedance. Excess negative electromagnetic energy is drawn into, converges into, the impedance from the external environment, increasing the overall negative energy flow, converging energy flow, down the wire, and cooling instead of heating. Hence negative energy is said to be cooling energy. In other words, any impedance becomes an amplifier for a sharply pulsed negative energy electromagnetic input, with the extra input negative energy for the amplification being freely furnished from the simultaneously pulsed external active vacuum environment. So this amplification of negative energy pulses is accomplished as pure regauging from the altered vacuum. Further, the action is free, due to the gauge freedom principle already recognized in gauge theory and quantum field theory. Thus, an impedance, or section of a circuit containing impedance, becomes an environmentally powered negative energy amplifier, a true negative impedance. We have called this action E-amplification or E-amp. The E-amp also exhibits cooling, and is useful in cooling circuits or refrigeration. In positive energy flow actions of normal electrical power engineering circuits, there is no parallel to this novel negative energy flow passive amplification action. Instead, positive energy circuits dissipate positive energy, dissipation being the exact opposite of amplification. One thus may regard the E-amp action as true negative resistance, for pulsed negative energy flow. Or more generally, as true negative impedance of any impedance section, for pulsed negative energy flow. Figure 25 on P41 shows some typical circuit and electrical power components that can exhibit the E-amp effect, for example transformers, coils, capacitors, various motors, incandescent lights, resistors, batteries, transmission lines, and so forth. Through the use of strongly pulsed negative electromagnetic energy, the invention achieves environmental amplification of negative energy flows and their cooling effects, by circuit impedance components that would otherwise normally dissipate heat. Instead, now they concentrate additional negative energy from the environment. The excess negative energy is freely taken from the local vacuum via the negative impedance process, and cooling, induced by the converging function and behavior of pulsed negative energy flow. Excess energy converging and E-amplification effects exist for inductively coupled sections of a circuit, due to the negative reactance and negative inductance of inductors in negative energy flow. Hence an inductively coupled section of the invention seemingly with a normal section efficiency of coefficient of performance less than 100% for positive energy may and will become an E-amp for negative energy and thereby actively produce coefficient of performance much greater than 1, utilizing the excess converging, negative, energy flowing in from the environment. Nonetheless, energy conservation is still rigorously obeyed. The excess negative energy does indeed enter the circuit via the negative impedance effect of the inductive coupling, from the second energy reservoir consisting of the negative energy of the altered local vacuum itself. Capacitive sections strongly pulsed with negative energy also develop the environmental amplification, EAMP, effect, particularly after some hours of use in such fashion. The EAMP effect appears to gradually condition the immediate active vacuum in which the capacitor or capacitive element is embedded, so that for large capacitances the EAMP effect appears gradually after a lengthy time delay of a dozen or more hours. The strength of the EAMP effect appears to increase in the presence of sharp gradient conditions, such as sharp pulse discharges. Such strong gradients are already known to violate the second law of thermodynamics, for example 37 grams, though why they do so has not previously been established. We discovered that, for a finite time during the gradient, such discharges significantly affect, alter, and engineer the local vacuum, and curve local space-time as well, producing a second negative energy reservoir of substantial negative energy fields and negative energy flow. The present classical second law of thermodynamics erroneously assumes a flat space-time and an inert vacuum, and the sharp gradient violates that assumption. Hence, the present second law fails for such situations, and a corrected statement of the second law is required. Such a corrected statement has been advanced by one of the present inventors, Bedini, and it is given later in this paper. The analysis of the present invention's operation must thus take into account such novel effects of negative energy, the uses of which are part of the claims of the invention. These novel functions of the invention are not present in conventional electrical engineering, but are indicated as possibilities, though never before systematically exploited, in physics and forefront thermodynamics. We now give some additional background necessary for understanding energy from the vacuum, by presenting the solution to the problem of the source charge. The source charge and its associated fields and potentials. The source charge problem. Sen stated the connection between the field and its source has always been and still is the most difficult problem in classical and quantum electrodynamics. The source charge problem is rarely slated explicitly. Bungay 28 expresses it as follows: in order to keep Maxwell's second-order equations and at the same time discard its advanced solutions in a consistent way, one must add the hypothesis that the charged bodies are the sources of the EM field, a hypothesis that is taken so much for granted that it is hardly stated explicitly. Further, Bungay-Riley states that 29. It is not usually acknowledged that electrodynamics, both classical and quantal, are in a sad state. Kosyakov states the source charge problem bluntly. 30. A generally acceptable, rigorous definition of radiation has not as yet been formulated. The recurring question has been, why is it that an electric charge radiates but does not absorb light waves, despite the fact that the Maxwell equations are invariant under time reversal? Electrical power engineers have little inkling that their electromagnetic model assumes every charge in the universe continuously emits real electromagnetic energy without any electromagnetic energy input. It is little wonder that such a formidable problem with the Maxwell-Heaviside theory, total violation of the conservation of energy law by every charge and every electromagnetic field, potential, and joule of electromagnetic energy, merely by its very existence has been expunged from the textbooks. Until electrical engineers find and incorporate in the EPE model how non-observable energy is input to a charge so that the charge can integrate it into real energy and constantly re-emit real, observable electromagnetic energy, they have no understanding at all of where the electromagnetic fields, potentials, and their joules of electromagnetic energy in their circuits actually come from. In short, not a single EE department presently understands what really furnishes the electromagnetic energy to an electromagnetic circuit, or where the energy comes from, or how. None ever has. Yet, the basis for the answer has been in particle physics since 1957 and the proof of the asymmetry of opposite charges. Setting up the solution to the source charge problem. M radiation is emitted by a source such as a charge or a dipole. To solve the source charge problem, we first apply the quantum field theory, QFT, model where any isolated charge also polarizes its surrounding vacuum. Thus, the classical isolated source charge is actually a peculiar quantum field theory dipolar ensemble. The bare charge in the middle is surrounded by a cluster of virtual charges of opposite sign in the seething vacuum. In quantum field theory, both the central bare charge and the total charge of its surrounding cluster of virtual charges are infinite 31, but to an external observer their difference is finite. Hence, the externally observed or externally measured value of the charge ensemble is that finite difference, and that difference has the sign of the bare charge in the middle. The magnitude of that observable difference is the classical textbook value of the magnitude of the observed charge of the so-called isolated charged particle. Again, in quantum field theory the single charge is not isolated at all, but is an ensemble of opposite charges. As such, the quantum field theory ensemble comprising the classical isolated source charge must exhibit the experimentally proven broken symmetry of opposite charges 32, 33, 34. The associated classical static electromagnetic field in space surrounding a classical fixed isolated source charge is comprised of photons, quanta of the field. Since any photon in free space is moving at light speed, a stream of observable photons is continuously emitted in all directions from the source charge. This continuous emission of real observable electromagnetic energy by a charge is also easily verified experimentally. Simply separate a static charge and instrumentally observe the appearance and expansion of its external field radially in all directions, spreading outward at light speed. The so-called static field in space consists of photons moving at light speed. It is not a static entity at all, but is a non-equilibrium steady-state (NES) system. As Van Flandern points out 35, to retain causality, we must distinguish two distinct meanings of the term static. One meaning is unchanging in the sense of no moving parts. The other meaning is sameness from moment to moment by continual replacement of all moving parts. We can visualize this difference by thinking of a waterfall. A frozen waterfall is static in the first sense, and a flowing waterfall is static in the second sense. Both are essentially the same at every moment, yet the latter has moving parts capable of transferring momentum, and is made of entities that propagate. Causality seems to require the latter. As is well known 30, there is no observable electromagnetic energy input to the source charge, and no instrument can measure any such input. Immediately one is confronted by a terrible dilemma: either the charge freely and continuously creates real, observable electromagnetic energy out of nothing at all, and thereby completely falsifies the conservation of energy law, or else it must receive and transduce, coherently integrate to observable form, a continuous input of electromagnetic energy in non-observable, virtual state, form. The standard electrical power engineering model, Maxwell-Heaviside electrodynamics, which does not consider virtual state energy inputs, thus has a formidable problem. It implicitly assumes that every electromagnetic field, electromagnetic potential, and joule of electromagnetic energy in the universe is and has been freely created out of nothing at all, in total violation of the conservation of energy law. This is the source charge problem, recognized as the most difficult problem in classical and quantum electrodynamics 36. It has been scrubbed from the classical texts for 100 years, and today's electrical power engineering students have little or no knowledge that the problem even exists. Even most electrical engineering professors seem unaware of this horrendous problem in their EPE electrodynamics model. Solution to the source charge problem. Obviously one must either totally surrender the conservation of energy law, or else one must extend the classical electromagnetic model to allow non-observable electromagnetic energy input to the source charge as a dipolar ensemble. Unless such input is accounted for, one's model accepts free and universal creation of energy from nothing. In short, the source charge must absorb disordered virtual photon energy of the seething vacuum, transduce, coherently integrate, the absorbed virtual energy into real observable photons, and re-emit real observable photons in all directions to form the associated ordered macroscopic fields and potentials. This requires that the source charge be recognized as a non-equilibrium steady state, NES, Thermodynamic system, continuously consuming positive entropy of the virtual state vacuum and producing, transducing it into, negative entropy in the observable state. It thus continuously pours out real photons, thereby establishing and maintaining its associated fields and potentials. As a dipolar ensemble in QFT, the source charge must exhibit the broken symmetry of opposite charges. A priori, such broken symmetry means that the input energy is received in virtual state form and results in observable energy output. So this broken symmetry action of the source charge is a continuous negative entropy operation 37, 38, 39, 40, totally violating the present form of the classical second law of thermodynamics, since that form prohibits negative entropy. Evans and Rondoni 16 have shown theoretically that non-equilibrium steady-state systems can produce continuous negative entropy, although they could find no known physical system that exhibited continuous negative entropy. It only takes one white crow to prove that not all crows are black. It follows that exhibiting a single physical system continuously producing negative entropy, continuous recovery of entropic energy, is sufficient to overturn the present form of the second law in its entirety. Consequently, we have exhibited such a system, the source charge. Every charge in the universe, together with its associated fields and potentials, continuously produces negative entropy and totally negates the overly restrictive present form of the second law of thermodynamics. Evans and Rondoni have shown theoretical permissibility 16, and the source charge experimentally confirms it. The present invention is a second entire class of systems also violating the classical second law while fully complying with the laws of physics. The second law must therefore be revised and extended, and the extended law must include negative entropy operations as well as positive entropy operations. As presently written, the erroneous second law of thermodynamics excludes every charge in the universe, every electromagnetic field, every electromagnetic potential, and every joule of M energy. It also completely excludes free regauging, a proven cornerstone of modern physics. We have previously restated an appropriate revised second law as follows 41. First, a negative entropy interaction occurs to produce some controlled order, available controlled energy. Then that initial available controlled order will either remain the same or be progressively disordered and decontrolled by subsequent entropic interactions over time, unless additional negative entropy interactions occur and intervene. Considering negative energy charges and negative electromagnetic energy, we must also consider persistent negative energy charges, such as Dirac's negative energy electron, as source charges, producing associated negative energy electromagnetic fields and negative energy electromagnetic potentials. These slightly persistent negative energy electrons, they are not positrons, since they have not yet interacted with mass, are negative energy source charges producing negative energy electromagnetic fields and potentials. Unknown to Condeputy and Prigogine, and to other thermodynamicists, these negative energy source charges and their resulting negative energy electromagnetic fields and potentials can and do occur in strong gradient processes 42 such as Bedini's sharp discharge pulses or spikes 43, 44, and they do have a finite persistence time during such spikes if the section of the circuit they occur in has an independent floating ground. Hence, during their persistence they produce usable negative energy electromagnetic fields and negative energy electromagnetic potentials. In turn, together with the EAMP effect in circuits with adroit isolation of pulse charging section grounds, this allows a startling new negative energy mechanism for charging batteries and powering systems with remarkable power and rapidity, for very little positive energy dissipation by the operator. Even peak pulse powers of 300 kilowatts are usable and achievable, with most of the energy being freely furnished from the vacuum environment via the EAMP effect. In normal common ground, closed-loop circuits, the negative energy holes are shorted directly to ground, interacting with mass in that electrical ground and changing to positrons, with positive mass and positive energy. This immediately kills the negative energy electromagnetic fields and potentials. Or looked at another way, in the internal vacuum energy interval between a positive energy electron and a negative energy electron, there is a continuum of positive energy electromagnetic field above the zero reference, and a continuum of negative energy electromagnetic field below the zero reference. Common grounding and closed current loop circuitry effectively blocks the use of this continuum. Floating ground in the asymmetric vacuum portion of the circuit where one deals with negative energy is essential so that the negative energy electromagnetic fields can be sustained and not extinguished. Negative electromagnetic energy in general behaves exactly opposite to our familiar positive electromagnetic energy. Deliberate use of negative, converging, electromagnetic energy as compared to positive, diverging, electromagnetic energy allows passage of very large converging electromagnetic negative energy currents through tiny wires, resistors, against back EMFs, etc. This enables the use of extraordinarily powerful negative energy electromagnetic pulses for charging a battery, or capacitor, very rapidly. It also enables the E-amp effect, in which resistive and inductive sections serve as amplifiers immediately, while capacitive sections gradually grow the local E-amp effect, usually over a dozen or more hours. Note that the batteries are also capacitors, and so the process does gradually condition the immediate vacuum environment of the batteries, so that the E-amp effect appears in the batteries also. This negative energy and the Dirac, as used in this novel battery charging invention, trace back to Dirac's electron theory 45. The invention deliberately utilizes a negative entropy process that transduces excess reordered and usable electromagnetic energy from disordered electromagnetic energy of the vacuum. It is a new field of technology, not previously considered in battery charging or in powering of electromagnetic circuits and devices or in electrodynamics itself. Some electromagnetics and physics background. Introduction. The invention uses characteristics of extended, higher group symmetry, electrodynamics not present in ordinary electrical engineering texts and classical electrodynamics texts, but present in physics including quantum field theory, gauge field theory, and non-equilibrium thermodynamics. It also utilizes negative energy electromagnetic fields and potentials, and negative energy currents. Hence an overview of the process's novel electrical physics is required, as well as some history of how classical electrodynamics and electrical power engineering came to be so unreasonably restricted. Some classical electrodynamics history. Maxwell Heaviside electrodynamics was formally initiated in a paper by Maxwell in 1865, containing his theory unifying electrical theory and magnetic theory as 20 quaternion and quaternion-like equations in 20 unknowns 46. Another Maxwell paper 47 in 1868 is of interest. Here Maxwell used an electrical derivation of his theory instead of the previous dynamical derivation. Maxwell's book, first edition, followed in 1873-48. At the time there were less than 3 dozen scientists worldwide who could understand Hamilton's quaternions 49 because worldwide there were only about 3 dozen capable electrodynamicists. Consequently, there was open scientific hostility to quaternion algebra. Heavily pressured by his publisher and peers to simplify the quaternion-like mathematics, Maxwell prepared most of a much simpler manuscript 50 that was published in 1881 after Maxwell's premature death in 1879. The second edition of Maxwell's full treatise 51 was also published after his death and incorporated severe simplifications, as did the third edition 52. Heaviside, perhaps the major architect of modifying Maxwell's theory, was a self-taught genius who never attended university. He was still teaching himself differential equations when Maxwell's first edition of his treatise was published in 1873. After Maxwell's death, several scientists, notably Heaviside 53, Gibbs 54, and Hertz 55, dramatically reduced the equations to much simpler vector equations, leaving the higher group symmetry quaternion algebra behind in action. Maxwell himself had also begun under pressure prior to his death in 1879. It is Heaviside's equations and notation, 5.3c, that are taught as Maxwell's equations in the standard undergraduate electrodynamics texts today. In the 1890s there occurred a short and sharp debate 56 mostly in the journal Nature between the vectorists and the few quaternionists such as Peter Guthrie Tate 57, 58, 59. The quaternion approach was just abruptly abandoned by the oncoming electrodynamicists in favor of the new and much simpler vector approach. The reduction of Maxwell's theory to vector algebra was a substantial reduction in topology, hence it produced a topological subset of the original Maxwell theory. Beginning with his doctoral thesis in 1875, Lorentz further truncated the Heaviside equations arbitrarily, by symmetrically regauging them 60, so that closed analytical solutions might be obtained and numerical methods usually avoided. This symmetrical regauging in fact nullifies any receipt and effective use of excess energy by a Maxwellian system from its external vacuum environment, although it implicitly assumes that the potential energy of the system is freely changed, regauged, twice by precisely such regauging energy freely received from its active environment. In electrical power engineering today, the symmetrically regauged and highly simplified equations of classical electrodynamics are used. Every electrodynamicist accepts that the potential and potential energy of an electromagnetic system can be freely changed at will, without work. However, he also usually insists that it only be done just so, where both potentials, J and A are changed, and where the two new free force fields that emerge are equal and opposite. That way, all the excess regauging energy is locked up as a change in the stress in the system. The excess energy is there, but it has passed into stress energy and is no longer available to perform translation work in the load. This weird arrangement to accept even enormous extra energy freely from the regauging environment, but to deliberately lock it up so that it cannot be put to practical use and perform useful work in the load is an inexplicable self-imposed destruction of easily obtaining copious energy from the vacuum via asymmetrical regauging for free. That it continues to be universally upheld and enforced, defies the human imagination. Paraphrasing Tesla, it is one of the most inexplicable aberrations of the scientific mind that has ever been recorded in history. This means that no free net force resultant due to the excess energy freely received from the vacuum is allowed to exist in the regauged circuit, to dissipate the excess free regauging energy by translating electrons as current and powering loads. Hence, today's electrical power systems are unable to effectively use their free extra regauging energy because it is always symmetrically received from the vacuum, via equal and opposite energy flows immediately nullifying each other. If asymmetrically received, then the received regauging energy could indeed be used to freely power loads. Note that, to even make an inert circuit work, we do have to asymmetrically apply voltage, which is an asymmetrical regauging. But we also are trained to employ the common ground closed current loop circuit with the source dipole of the external generator in the loop. That way, the circuit itself ruthlessly enforces gauge symmetry, and thus makes the back EMF equal to the forward EMF, preventing any use of the freely received extra regauging energy to translate extra electrons freely and perform some free work in the loads. So Lorentz's arbitrary symmetry limitation is self-enforced by the closed current loop circuit, which provides the two equal and opposite regauging forces in the form of the equal forward EMF and back EMF. Since the two always sum to a net EMF equals 0, this insane circuit cannot use its excess vacuum energy to perform free work useful to the operator. Again we are reminded of Tesla's characterization of the sheer stupidity of such an arrangement. It's rather like bringing home free groceries, locking them firmly in the pantry, and never touching them because one refuses to unlock the pantry. Small wonder then that one would have to continually pay for more groceries. Actually, to be complete, earlier L.V. Lorentz, spelled without the letter T, 61 had independently derived the electrodynamic equations and had also done the symmetrical regauging for which Lorentz, spelled with a T, was credited while Lorentz's work was ignored. Jackson and Oken 62 have formally clarified how Lorentz was and is erroneously credited with what Lorentz had already done before him. Theory of energy flow through space. In the 1880s, after Maxwell was already dead, Two scientists Heaviside 63, 64 and panting 65 independently and simultaneously developed the notion of the flow of M energy through space, and formalized and published it. The M energy associated with a circuit flows through space surrounding the conductors and outside them. The electrical current / is not part of the energy flow equation at all, although most engineering students have significant initial difficulty comprehending this, as pointed out by Heald 66 and many others. Specifically, / is part of the power 6, which is the time rate of performing work. Hence the current is associated with the circuit's potential energy dissipation as work. Note that the word entropy originally meant the dissipation of potential energy. Asymmetric regauging increases the potential energy freely, so it is the exact opposite of the entropy process. I.e., it is a negative entropy process. A tiny, panting, fraction of this external M positive energy flow is diverged into the circuit to potentialize the Drude electron 67, and the EMF fields drive the current through the circuit, with potentialization energy of the moving charges being dissipated in the circuit's loads and losses 68. The huge remainder of the electromagnetic positive energy flow, i.e., the circuital flow component discovered by Heaviside and unknown to panting, since panting only considered the part of the flow that is diverged into the circuit to potentialize the electrons, is not diverged because it is in curled field form. In a flat spacetime, assumed in the classical theory but seldom specifically pointed out, the divergence of the curl is zero in vector analysis. It is not necessarily zero when the local spacetime is QD'd, but classical electromagnetic completely omits this case by its assumption of flat spacetime. However, physics acknowledges that spacetime could be flat only if it were devoid of matter. 7. Before his death, in unpublished papers, Heaviside had also considered gravitational implications of his extra curled field energy flow component 69. As Lathwaite pointed out, this may yet have tremendous impact on physics. Quoting Lathwaite 70, Heaviside had originally written the energy flow as S equal, XH, plus G, where G is a circuital flux. Panting had only written S equal, XH. Taking P to be the density of matter and E the intensity of a gravitational force, Heaviside found that the circuital flux G can be expressed as Pu, Ce, where U represents the velocity of P and C is a constant. When the extra Heaviside curled field energy flow component is accounted, every electrical generator and battery is already a coefficient of performance greater than 1.0 energy converter, freely receiving enormous electromagnetic energy from the seething local vacuum and outputting it, but wasting almost all of it. The generator or battery terminals already output into space surrounding the external circuit many orders of magnitude more energy than the operator inputs by cranking the shaft of the generator or by having the battery dissipate internal chemicals. Our own rough estimate of the magnitude of the Heaviside circuital component is that it is often a trillion or more times the magnitude of the panting diverged energy flow component that enters the circuit. Note again Evans' calculation 7 of the enormous amount of energy available in the local curved spacetime due to the presence of mass. In the 1880s and 1890s, no possible source of this enormous extra Heaviside energy flow in divergence-free form was known. Special and general relativity and curved spacetime were not yet born, and the very notion of active spacetime and active vacuum was unthinkable. Unable to solve the mystery of the source of Heaviside's extra but huge non-divergent energy flow component, and unwilling to be labeled as a perpetual motion advocate, Lorentz simply originated a clever trick to dispose of the problem itself. He reasoned that the huge curled field energy flow component did nothing because it was not even diverted into the circuit. He believed it did not interact, and so he stated that it had no physical significance. Consequently, Lorentz integrated the entire energy flow vector around a closed surface assumed surrounding any volume element of interest 71. This effectively retained Panting's divergent energy flow component, while arbitrarily discarding the non-diverged huge Heaviside energy flow component, since it subtracted the outgoing Heaviside energy flow component equal to the incoming Heaviside energy flow component. Lorentz's original argument that such an enormous curled field energy flow component has no physical significance is still smoothly used by electrodynamics, Sys 72 to justify disposing of it, thus retaining the Maxwell-Heaviside assumption of a flat spacetime as a reasonable approximation. No one except Evans 7 seems to have noticed that such enormous M energy is indeed available in and around ordinary circuits due to their local curvature of space, time. Experimental proof of Heaviside's extra energy flow component. This assumption that there can be no physical significance of the Heaviside curled field energy flow is rigorously true only for flat spacetime, which does not occur. It is experimentally falsified by the known and widely replicated negative resonance absorption of the medium in the field of optics. A typical experiment yielding coefficient of performance equals 18 is given by boron 73, although scientists in that field carefully speak and write only of the reaction cross-section change, and do not point out that the thermodynamic coefficient of performance greater than 1.0. That way they are not accused of advocating violation of energy conservation. That is why they use the innocuous phrase negative resonance absorption of the medium rather than excess emission from the absorbing medium. When local space-time is curved, the divergence of the curl is not necessarily zero. In that case, a fraction of the arbitrarily discarded Heaviside energy flow component is diverged after all, turning it into an extra Poynting energy flow component that is diverged and therefore accounted. In such boron-type experiments in the infrared or ultraviolet, the input energy is oscillating. Further, the absorbing charged particles are in tuned particle resonance at that same input frequency. Voila! The very definition of field intensity, as determined by an interacting unit point static charge, is therefore altered. Indeed, the interaction, rigorously, its reaction cross-section, is dramatically increased, just as surging a rock to and fro in a river's flow diverts more water flow than does the same rock when absolutely stationary. So some 18 times as much Poynting energy flow is re-emitted by the absorbing medium of the resonant particles, as is present in the Poynting component of the input energy calculated for the same particle when static. Yet energy is conserved at all times, since scientists do not account the huge Heaviside energy flow input that actually was made by the operator. Though normally that extra flow does nothing, in the boron-type experiment it does do something. Specifically, its divergence becomes slightly non-zero and therefore some 18 times as much real M energy is diverged into the detector/circuit as is diverged for the non-resonant case. The other indirect but strong experimental evidence of Heaviside's enormous energy flow component is given by the recent Wilkinson microwave anisotropy probe, WMAP, measurements showing that the universe is comprised of 4% ordinary matter, 23% dark matter, and 73% dark energy 74. Such a startling percentage of dark, negative, energy is explicable by reaccounting the circuital Heaviside energy flow component arbitrarily discarded by Lorentz a century ago. The Heaviside negative energy flow component from the Dirac sea holes persisting during sharp gradients is unaccounted and enormous. Huge astronomical explosions can persist for some little period, so that the enormous gradient also persists for some period. Hence the production of rather enormous amounts of negative energy in the unaccounted Heaviside negative energy flow components during these persisting strong gradients. The inescapable conclusion is that the dark energy is negative energy, because it generates anti-gravity, thereby generating the unexpected but experimentally observed acceleration of the universe's expansion. Problems with the EPE model and corresponding circuits. The Maxwell-Heaviside-Lorentz theory still assumes the material ether, which has been falsified since the 1890s by the Michelson-Morley experiments 75. The original assumption of the material ether allowed a hydrodynamic material fluid theory, since supposedly there was not a single point devoid of mass in the entire universe. In turn, this resulted in erroneously assuming /O/re fields in mass-free space, a fundamental error perpetuated in the EPE model to this day. It is well known that there exists no force devoid of mass 76, 77, because mass is a component of force by the definition F equal d/dt, mv. As we previously pointed out, the expansion has two terms, both containing mass. We stated that the standard electrical power engineering theory assumes a flat spacetime, falsified by general relativity for nearly a century, and an inert vacuum, falsified by particle physics since the 1920s and 30s. It therefore specifies only those Maxwell-Lien systems which effectively function usually because of the use of the ubiquitous closed current loop circuit as if they had no net active vacuum environment and no net active curved space-time environment. The entire electrical power engineering theory, and industry, thus assumes away much of the findings of modern particle physics. The industry's archaic M model can only be upheld by the ubiquitous usage of the closed current loop circuit, which self-enforces symmetrical self-regaging, resulting in the topological subset of Maxwell's theory, previously referred to, corresponding to current EPE usage. A windmill analogy can be useful. So to speak, the conventional electrical power engineering model is like building a windmill inside a closed barn, so there can never be a free net environmental wind to use and do free work, regardless of the atmospheric winds present outside the self-restricting barn. In that case, the operator himself would have to pay to furnish external energy to rotate the blades and power the shaft and loads. From the well-known gauge freedom principle, nature does not require such an arduous self-limitation. But the electrical engineering model does require it, and electrical engineering practice enforces it in every circuit and power system, and in the power grid itself. So to speak, use of the ubiquitous closed current loop circuit shuts the barn door and negates any net usable atmospheric wind by negating any free net force field appearing due to asymmetric self-regaging. That occurs even though two extra free force fields are still assumed by the re-gauging of the Maxwell-Heaviside equations, as are two changes of the potential energy of the system. But, the two fields are forcibly made equal and opposite so they sum to a net zero translation vector summation. Hence, they cannot translate electrons as current, which is necessary to power system loads. The standard electrical power engineering model erroneously assumes an inert external vacuum and flat spacetime which is the thermodynamic equivalent of an inert environment and therefore an isolated system. The model also assumes that all free regauging energy that does arise, because of the regauging of the Maxwell equations, is and can only be used to perform internal work on the system itself, to produce extra stress in the system. In short, it's like placing two equal rowers in a rowboat, one in front and the other in the rear, and having them row strenuously in opposite directions. Simply simultaneously producing greater but equal magnitudes of forward EMF and back EMF, does nothing but increase the physical stress of the system. This further requires that all net energy utilized to regauge the potential energy of the system asymmetrically, so as to allow it to power its loads and losses, must be externally furnished as energy inputs to the system paid for by the operator himself and not freely furnished from the environment. The model specifically locks up any and all usable extra energy inputs received from the active space-time and active vacuum environment, even though such energy is readily received and is received in every system. But the system itself has been deliberately designed in such a way that its freely received regauging energy from the environment can only do internal work on the system to produce excess stress of the system. The Lorentz symmetrical regauging of Maxwell's equation 60, i.e., to the reduced topological subset, corresponding to lower group symmetry algebra, arbitrarily discarded all those permissible Maxwell systems which freely and asymmetrically self-regauge themselves by receiving and using, to power loads, excess potential energy from their active environment and exhibiting a net non-zero free force along with it. Symmetrical regauging made the equation simpler and much easier to solve analytically, but at the expense of discarding all Maxwell-Lien systems capable of exhibiting coefficient of performance greater than 1.0 by receiving and using excess electromagnetic energy from their vacuum environment. In short, it excluded all freely asymmetrically regauging Maxwell-Lien systems from using that free energy to power loads. The ubiquitous closed current loop circuit forcibly makes the back EMF equal to the forward EMF, hence self-enforces Lorentz symmetrical regauging. With such a circuit, any Maxwell-Lien system that does freely symmetrically regauge, receives extra energy from its vacuum environment twice, but it must and will use half the received energy in the external circuit to defeat any net use of the other half of the regauging energy freely received. In short, it uses its free re-gauging energy to increase the stress in the system, by opposing the forward EMF across the external source dipole. It is prohibited from using its free regauging energy to forcibly translate electrons as current and do useful free external work in the load. Free regauging, freely changing the potential energy of any electromagnetic system, does not have to be proven again. It is well established and already an axiom of quantum field theory and gauge field theory. All electrodynamicists use it, including Maxwell Heaviside electrodynamicists and electrical power engineers 60. Any electromagnetic circuit or system which fully obeys the symmetrical Maxwell-Heaviside-Lorentz equations cannot output more usable energy than it receives from the operator himself, i.e., from its external power source. It cannot just freely receive extra unobservable, virtual photon, energy from the active vacuum and asymmetrically regauge itself thereby. In thermodynamic terms, such a system is a system in self-enforced or self-restored equilibrium, hence maximizing its entropy and incapable of exhibiting negative entropy. Self-ordering coefficient of performance is greater than low, coefficient of performance equals infinity, etc. All being capabilities permitted to a system far from equilibrium in its energetic exchange with its active environment. One easily demonstrates that an asymmetrically self-regauging system can be powered by its active environment, providing coefficient of performance equals infinity without any energy input by the operator. A circuit containing a load, and powered by a solar cell array is an example. Another is a windmill-powered load performing useful work. Indeed, when the river's energetic flow is included, a hydroelectric generator system and its entire transmission grid, together with thousands of external loads being powered, is an example of a coefficient of performance equals infinity electrical power system. Thermodynamically, such a system is far from equilibrium, hence is permitted to exhibit negative entropy relative to the operator's input energy. In short, the operator need input nothing at all, the active environment inputs it all. So some known electromagnetic systems in a known observable active environment such as a solar cell in the observable sunlight are able to perform coefficient of performance equals infinity, since the operator need furnish no energy input at all. In this case, the observable environmental energy input simply replaces the operator's input that would otherwise be required. The efficiency of a typical solar cell may be only 17%, so that it wastes 83% of all the sunlight energy input to it. But since the operator inputs nothing, the coefficient of performance equals infinity and the solar cell array system with load is said to be self-powered by its active observable environment, not by the active non-observable vacuum. We point out that the solar radiation fields and potentials were generated by distant source charges on the Sun, and those source charges extracted all that solar energy from the local vacuum there at the Sun. So, even the solar cell array is fundamentally powered by electromagnetic energy originally extracted from the distant vacuum. All electromagnetic energy in all electromagnetic fields, electromagnetic potentials, etc. comes directly from the active vacuum via its interaction with the appropriate associated source charges. Areas known to violate the second law of thermodynamics. Condeputy and Prigogine 42 lists several areas already known and recognized to violate the second law of thermodynamics. These areas include, I. Rarefied media, where the local equilibrium concept fails, 2. Strong gradients, about which little is known, either theoretically or experimentally and which are deliberately used in this invention, and 3. Long-lived memory effects in materials. The present invention uses the fact that strong gradients given by sharp pulses break the equilibrium of the vacuum itself and therefore break its symmetry, lifting some electrons from the Dirac sea and leaving some temporarily persisting Dirac sea holes. Because of this broken symmetry, some virtual energy has suddenly become observable energy. The holes in the vacuum do persist during the persistence of the sharp gradient, and often a bit longer. While they exist, the holes serve as negative energy source charges and thereby produce negative energy M fields and potentials spreading at the speed of light. The negative energy M fields and potentials from these persisting holes are directly used in the process of the invention to produce convergent energy flow, a flow of negative energy, as previously defined and described. The special characteristics of negative energy are then utilized so that even 300 kilowatt pulses of negative energy can safely be used to transiently charge batteries at an enormous rate, with almost all the energy being freely received in the battery from the externally symmetrical active vacuum environment. Negative, convergent, energy flow pulses of very large magnitude can be easily obtained and used to charge batteries or capacitors very quickly and impulsively, whereas such large magnitude pulses of positive, divergent, M energy could not be used without probable battery or capacitor damage. Instead of destabilizing the battery's processes as with giant positive energy pulses, giant negative energy pulses further stabilize them as if momentarily riveting them to greater stability. Thus, by using large magnitude negative energy pulses, the invention is able to implosively and rapidly recharge and restabilize stabilized batteries and capacitors with these large peak intensities of negative energy furnished freely from the momentarily destabilized Dirac sea. A capacitor or battery, for example, does not care whether it is charged by positive energy charges induced onto one plate, or negative energy charges induced onto the other plate, or a combination of both simultaneously. The advantage of using negative energy is that enormous energy density pulses can be freely had from the local vacuum environment and used, charging the capacitor or battery very stably and much more rapidly than is possible using positive energy. Positive energy flow is always trying to scatter, since it is basically diverging energy. Any slightest obstacle, impedance, results in more scattering, so that some control is lost and some of the energy so laboriously being held in the flow is scattered away. On the other hand, negative energy flow is always trying to further converge and narrow along its line of travel. Any slightest obstacle, impedance, to the control that is prohibiting additional convergence, will thus allow more convergence to occur. The result is an amplification of the actual energy flow being propagated, by excess energy converging into the stream of the flow, from the surrounding asymmetrical vacuum. In comparison, positive energy is by nature diverging, while negative energy is by nature converging. Positive energy is by nature heating, while negative energy is by nature cooling. Positive energy is by nature entropic, while negative energy is by nature negentropic. To use positive energy, one must forcibly restrain its heating and dissipation tendency, else one loses the energy and has less, or even none, left. To use negative energy, one may release the convergence restraints on it, so that one deliberately takes advantage of its natural convergent tendency. By simply releasing the restraints, one thus easily invokes the active environment exchange to furnish even more of the negative energy. One may transduce positive energy to negative energy and vice versa, since theoretically any form of energy can be changed into any other form of energy, so long as the total amount of energy is conserved. A capacitor is such a transducer. Batteries are stabilized by the process of recharging with negative energy. Over their lifetime of recharging by positive, divergent, energy, at the micro level the plates develop roughened chemical coatings, spotty chemical corrosions, etc. Recharging rapidly, i.e., with repetitive great power such as 300 kilowatts pulses, with negative energy also rapidly works upon these defect areas, correcting or partially reversing many of them. So the subsequent performance of the battery is enhanced and its lifetime is prolonged. Indeed, a severely deteriorated battery with appreciable corrosion damage can usually be materially rejuvenated easily and efficiently by using negative energy to repeatedly recharge it 7/8. By use of negative energy and the E-amp effect, this invention analogously forms a heat pump-like recharging situation, in that two energy reservoirs are provided for the energy necessary to do the recharging, or system powering. These are, I, the small positive energy input by the operator, which mostly is used for switching and timing operations that initiate and control the negative energy flow, and 2. The momentary but very large magnitude negative energy input, which is obtained via the EAMP effect and used for implosive recharging and restabilization of the battery in a very short time. Corresponding to the use of the compressor to concentrate more heat in a given volume, to enhance its extraction by the heat pump system, in the negative energy system the EAMP effect concentrates, converges, additional energy intensity into the negative energy propagation, thus enhancing its extraction from the external vacuum environment. This also amplifies the cooling effect of the use of negative energy. This invention transduces excess negative energy from the vacuum, via the EAMP effect, into positive energy, and uses the positive energy to power conventional loads. Conclusions. The radiant energy engineering process allows very rapid and highly amplified recharging of batteries, capacitors, etc., direct extraction and use of excess electromagnetic energy from the vacuum, work-free engineering of the mass, free field and potential in space prior to its interaction with mass to produce a force, producing coefficient of performance greater than 1 electromagnetic systems and electrical power systems, while rigorously obeying conservation of energy, physics, and thermodynamics, producing coefficient of performance equals infinity electromagnetic systems and electrical power systems, while rigorously obeying conservation of energy, physics, and thermodynamics, a practical process and method for producing and using negative energy, together with evoking and using the environmental amplification, EAMP, effect, an entirely new methodology for operating and powering electromagnetic circuits and electrical power systems. And a novel new methodology and set of processes which are complex in their theoretical modeling but which are also simply implemented in practical circuits and electrical power systems.